Ahoy! Camino Lombard and piano, all the way from Cape Town. Now we'd like to feature Tomasito.
How's it, guys? Good morning. Hope you're all doing really well. So we're doing things a little bit differently this today. I'm actually streaming from Walden Marr's office, and we do have three friends, two at the moment, Rian and Kaketso with us. So obviously the thing is we can't fill the room at the moment because of restrictions of COVID and how many people we're allowed to have in the building. But hopefully soon that's going to change and we'll be able to have more people. I'm going to ask Rian and Kaketsu to sneak around the corner there and give you guys a wave later on. So this morning, I'm also going to present the course a little bit different. We're going to try and squeeze in the overview obviously between now and 1 o'clock. Maybe we can even finish slightly earlier. And then obviously we're going to continue with practicals thereafter, and then tomorrow we're going to look at more some of the advanced features. Obviously we can't stream for 8 hours, that's not going to work. So you guys can ask questions if you want. Rian is checking the stream there, and also Neldo is going to be watching out for questions, so we can do questions as we go along. And yeah, so let's get into it. I hope you guys can all hear me nicely. I've got a lot in front of me today. So first things first, we're going to look at some of the overview features for today. So obviously training today is on a VI1000. The VI1000 is part of this family that you're seeing in front of you at the moment. So it's the baby. VI1000, VI2000 and VI3000 in essence is exactly the same console. The only thing that's different about these consoles are how many input banks we have on any of them. So obviously on the VI1 we've got the one input bank and the one output bank, which can also be configured to take input faders. On the 2000 we've got the two input banks, and the 3000 obviously three inputs, outputs, and all the other configurations except for the options you have on the analog cards, the local ins at the back. These consoles are exactly identical. They've got 96 inputs and 24 stereo buses or groups that can be configured to an aux, a matrix, or a group. We've got two option cards, and then they all come standard with local MADI and Dante. Just going to skip forward. So this is the rear of a VI3000. We're going to take a closer look at this in a moment. So on the left hand side there we've got outputs and inputs. We can also change the configuration of those top cards. So the actual physical analog ins and outs is something that we can change. Then we've got some digital AES in and out. We've got MADI and Dante in and out, clocking in and out. And then two option cards on the right hand side there, if you can see my pointer. We've got dual power supply. Maybe just something that's worth knowing about dual power supply is the fact that the one is obviously for running a UPS and the other one is to run hot power. You won't run both of these. It's something I'm doing today, but in the building we do have surge protection, and we also have backup power. So normally if you're on site, you'll plug in the UPS on the one side and the hot power on the other side. There's two reasons for that. Obviously, if you lose power, you want your console to stay on, so you can take care of the power issue. But the other thing as well, if for some reason you get a spike, you don't want to blow both of your power supplies, because then you're in deep trouble. These are option cards. We're going to look at the options now. We've got a clocking in and out. This is a Dante port, and there's also a MADI port. It's good to know that the inputs, you either have to decide whether you're going to use MADI or Dante. On the output side, they are parallel. So whatever you're patching to MADI 1, you'll get on Dante 1. AES in and out, quite straightforward. HiQ nets for our control. We obviously have a MIDI in and out. That's something we're going to touch on tomorrow. And USBs if you want to add some additional drives or keyboards or mouse. This is ports that you can utilize for that. And there's a HDMI to duplicate a screen. It's not something that Soundcraft's actually ever utilized, but the port is there. That output gets driven by a Matrox card. Great. So this is just a closer look, just how those ins and outs look. I just thought I'll show the word clock in and out. It's just a normal BNC. So this is obviously if we're sharing digital audio between devices. What we want to do is we want to introduce a clock, because you can't share digital audio between any hardware without having it clocked together. That tells obviously the audio where it is at the moment. And then closer look at the MIDI there. There's the USB ports. This is the IQNet. So this is how we'll control our console. So actually, if on the top view, you'll see I've got my computer on the right hand side there. So I've actually connected this computer to a network hub or a switch and the console as well via that port. And when I change something, let's quickly go to this bank. When I change something, oh, I've lost connection. Fantastic. Let's quickly have a look why. Mirroring. We're running the console in mirror mode. So if I go to bank A, this is something I might need to fix, I don't know why. So the idea is that the console should be mirrored. I've lost connection. Okay, I'll come back to that. I'm not quite sure why that's happened. So the network port is one of the tools we'll use to connect more than one device. I'll fix that and then I'll show you how I'm using that. Also, metadata coming from wireless receivers, like a Shure ULXD receiver. We can take the data in there and then display it on the console screen. Also, iPad control. If you connect an iPad to a wireless router, the data go via that port. MIDI in and out. So MIDI can be used for triggers. I'll demonstrate that tomorrow. Then AES in and out. And these are digital ins, which are standard on these consoles. These are the analog cards. Actually, on this specific console, I took the photo of this console, which is the VI1. And the reason why I wanted to show that is because that output card there at the bottom, you'll see actually there's some labeling on there. So if you start up the console, your monitor outputs already patched to those, and your left and right will already be patched to those outputs. You cannot pull that card out. So obviously you can change the other ones around, but that card needs to stay in the console. The reason is that the config file, your start file, when you load a blank file, it's looking for that card. It wants to see that card. And there'll be a mismatch between that default file and the hardware if you don't have it in place. So on the back of the console, when it comes to these analog option cards, you need to have that guy in there. This is the bigger. I must maybe just go to Facebook and see if you guys are all happy and following along. Hope you guys can all hear me nicely. I'm sure you can. Great. So this is the bigger family. It's the VI 5000 and 7000. The 5000's got the same form factor as the 3000. The difference here is that what looks like a console here is actually not a console at all. It's just a control surface. So this is only control, and this is the brain. We call it the local rack. And this is where all your inputs and outputs will be. You can put option cards in there. So the local outs basically is this rack here. It's not on the back of the console. Or on the control surface. The control surface now it's got basically a network cable between here and the local rack, and there's 3 cables obviously for your headphones, because you need to be able to still, when you solo something and you want to use your headphone out. So there's 2 returns, and there's also 1 cable for your talkback mic. But except for that, there's no physical ins and outs on the back of a 5000 or 7000. All of that's happening on the local rack. So why do we need this? It's a different application. It's an application where we need more scalability, because there's more places for option cards, and also where we need to put the local rack or the brain in a server room, for instance, like in a broadcast scenario or in an OB van. You want to put that local rack where the engineers can do some patching and where the air is nice and clean and being filtered. So it's a different application, and obviously it's a lot more scalable. As I said, on the 1000, 2000, 3000, we only have those 2 option cards, and you can see at the bottom here there is a lot more place You can actually put 5 in. If you take the blue link out, you can put an additional one in. The blue link card is driving this here. So this is also a digital connection. It's a Harman protocol called Blue Link. So you can even pull this breakout box out, and if it's in a church scenario, you'll be able to have this part in the server room, and these ins and outs you'll be able to rack at front of house at a church or a theater and still have it there. And have your local rack in a nice clean environment that's air conditioned, and also where your technicians or your engineers will have easy access to it. 7,000, 5,000 is identical. What's the difference between this and the 3,000? Obviously, the obvious hardware differences, but also you've got 128 channels and 32 stereo buses, so it's a bit more there. And obviously the 5 option cards, and it comes standard with this Blue Link protocol, which is this guy. Yeah, makes sense. I'm talking to my audience of 2 in the room, but I hope it makes sense to everyone on Facebook as well. Rian, are you checking Facebook? Rian says he's checking Facebook, so you can put your complaints to Rian. Soundcraft Vi option cards. There is a huge amount of option cards, and this is actually, I would say, this is one of the selling points when it comes to these consoles, is that they can integrate quite easily with other systems and other consoles because of the option cards. To change a console, if you're not happy with a console, to swap out that console is a lot of money. But to change out the card is a small investment. You're keeping the infrastructure you have, and you're swapping out the card to add additional Dante or additional a RedNet card or whatever the case might be. So in that case, when you can start and buy a system and put the cards in you need for now, and if the church expand, you need to break out more. You're swapping a card and not a console. Obviously, in the long term, that saves massive money. And there's quite a lot of different cards. The ones on the left here is the ones I thought we would use most often, and definitely what I have used most often. I've put the Blue Link in there because it comes standard in the 5,000 and 7,000 range. Dante, obviously everyone's using Dante. The MADI comes in a Cat 5 version. The reason is obviously in the install scenario where you're not plugging it in and plugging it out, a Cat 5 might be a cheaper solution. And if the infrastructure is already there, and the cables have already been pulled in, then I guess it makes sense going with that. In the live scenario, we'll probably almost always use the MADI fiber. Even cheap fiber is pretty strong, and you can obviously, the advantage there is you can run quite a significant distance. Even on cheap plastic fiber, you can push distances. You can also add additional lines ins and outs. So this is for your outboard gear, mics ins and out, AES in and out, 3G SDI. So if in a broadcast scenario and you need to grab signals off your video switches, that's what you'll be using there. Dolby for TV, ADAT, maybe in a studio environment, ANET, GPIOs. You can add RockNet, CobraNet, and EtherSound. Those are the ones. So quite a nice selection there. And this is obviously something that grows as new cards and new protocols come out. Harman normally adds them. I wanted to talk about these 2 cards because for some reason it causes confusion with everyone, and 90% of the phone calls that they're laughing at me. 90% of the phone calls that I get is normally about one of these 2 cards and about the control, whether it's on or off. So when you get the card, a MADI card from the factory, it is set up in a standard configuration, which is 64 in and 64 out, which is normal MADI protocol. And the control is on. What does it mean, the control is on? If the control on a card is on, when you introduce a stage rack to it, it will prompt that stage rack and ask, listen, what stage rack am I talking to? And then the stage rack will reply and say, listen, I've got 64 inputs and 32 outputs. Then once you save your show file, it gets saved into that show file from there on. So what Harman has done concerning how they use the MADI. They've used as little as possible bandwidth to still have the 64 in and out. Some other manufacturers, they will sacrifice some channels to have bidirectional communication all the time. On the Soundcraft side, we've only kept enough bandwidth to switch on our phantoms and to pull our gains and to obviously put in our pads if there's a preamp that's got an onboard pad. All the other bandwidth's being used to transfer audio back and forth. So the advantage is that you always you've got the 64 in and out, so you can populate a big stage rack to have either all those ins or all those outs, and you're not losing any of the channels. What you need to remember though is when you make the initial connection, that's when the console prompts that rack what it is. So if you do hardware changes, you need to be aware of the fact that you need to tell the console then that you've done that. So at the back of the console, and we'll talk about this again, there's a little button called config. You push it. It basically recalibrates the system and it checks what hardware is connected. Okay. The control part of that card can also be switched off. And this does sometimes cause confusion. So you've got you connect your stage rack to your card, and the audio is passing, but you can't control the rack. And when you go to this part where you're supposed to be seeing your stage racks, you can see there's nothing there, but you can see there's maybe audio going in and out, which means the audio is being passed, but there's no control. That means 99.9% of the time, it means someone has switched the control off, and you can do it. We do it when we design big systems, and I think I actually have an example of that. Going slightly off topic, but let's quickly have a look. So when I say big systems, you can actually go quite crazy with a design. Let me just see. Oh, I think I've taken it out. Oh, sorry for you guys. I had a design here of that I did previously. I think I was boring everyone with I'll maybe bring it up later. So I did design I did for a show called Afrikaans is Groot, and there we use a massive MADI infrastructure, and because we are passing the audio off to so many devices, some of the cards, the inputs, we want to physically switch the control off so it can never receive the control, so we don't confuse that card. So that is why we can do it. And if you look on the screen at the moment, you'll see I've drawn a little arrow there that says stage box detection enabled. So the last two pins, we're not going to go into depth here. Those dip switches, the last two enables or disenables the control. So it's just something to be aware of. If you ever come across a card and it's not picking up the stage rack, this is probably what's happened. Someone used it in an infrastructure where there was maybe playback plugged onto this, and they wanted to make sure that card never thinks there's a stage box connected to it. And they wanted to switch the control off, or maybe they wanted to limit the amount of inputs or outputs, and they did it with that dip switch there. All of this is in the manual. The only thing that's really important, and if you ever get stuck, you're more than welcome to contact me, and I'll explain it over the phone to you, or I'll send you. I've actually keep this in a folder. I can send it to you via Facebook or WhatsApp. So the only two things that's important is the fact that you can limit the amount of inputs and outputs if you want to, and you can switch the control off. That's all you need to know for now. Which brings me to this. On the website, if you go to the Soundcraft website, under the option cards, the third download tab is VI Series MADI Fundamentals. And if MADI infrastructure is something that you're interested in, and you're probably going to work with it if you're a freelancer or work in the live sound environment, go and download that because it explains exactly how these cards work, and also explains kind of the history of MADI and where it comes from and the limitations and all that. So if you want to educate yourself, go to the website. It's called VI Series MADI Fundamentals, and then it's got white paper codes there off behind, and I would encourage everyone that's interested in digital or MADI at least to go and read that. Great. Stage racks, these are the two VI stage boxes. The one on the left is called the VI stage box, and the one on the right is called the compact stage rack, stage box at least. The one I mostly use is the big one on the left. It's normally populated with 64 inputs and 32 outputs. You can, however, swap the cards around to fit your liking, and that's fine. Neldo is delivering some coffee. Sorry for everyone on Facebook. And then we've got a compact stage rack on the right. What makes this one interesting is that it's got these three option slots in the front and two at the back. And then it's also got this additional slot that actually fits an option card. So what this allows you to do is, if you're in a such scenario where you need a combination of, say, analog outputs or inputs, but you also want to maybe drive your personal monitoring system via Dante, you'll be able to slot a Dante card in here and then use those dip switches to minimize the amount of channels that's going there. And then whatever is left will spill over to this Dante card, or whatever. It can be a MADI card or analog ins on outs, which makes it quite nifty. I mean, thank you. This is quite a cool option or solution when you're running maybe in a medium-sized church where you want two stage racks, one on the left on the stage and one on the right on the stage, and everyone is on Emmys, which means you don't need that huge amount of analog outs because maybe there's no physical monitors, but you'd still need some. Sorry? Great, awesome. The link has been posted for the fundamentals. Thank you, Rian, for that. So that's quite a nifty card, stage box at least. I thought I'll just include these. So these are the two stage boxes that go with the SI range. The reason why I've got them here is because on the VI we do have the option of actually having a Cat5 card. So any of the stage racks will connect to any of the consoles, which is a really nice feature. So if you have SIs and you're upgrading to a VI, those racks are not wasted. I mean, you can put another card in and then put them in front of a house, and you'll be able to use them for playback ins and outs or for a press split or whatever the case might be. Those are the two options, and that's really all I wanted to say about that. Great. So we're going to go quickly to the console. We're going to talk about some layouts. Let me switch here. I feel like I'm flying a Boeing today with all my controls all over the place. Great. So obviously, as I said, we're looking at the VI1 today. So what you want to walk away with today is an understanding of where to find everything on the console, understanding of how to connect a stage rack to it, and the basic stuff. How do we patch an input? How do we patch an output? Later today in the practicals, we'll maybe spill it over to patching some effects. You know, the normal type of stuff. How do you get operational, and also what are the pitfalls, the things like, for instance, what I've just explained about the control on the cards. That's quite an important thing to remember. I've got a stage rack here actually, so I can maybe. This is something I wanted to demonstrate, and unfortunately, I don't have the stage rack I wanted to show. But the stage racks, they look like this. And there's one other thing that I just wanted to mention while we're here. This is a mini stage rack, 16, so it's a baby one, and it's just got a MADI HD card. So that's a card that comes with it, and it's a Cat5 card, and it's only got one output, so it's obviously for a smaller configuration. Something that's interesting, and I also want to mention it here because it seems to be a pitfall often when it comes to setups is people will say, I'm getting my inputs but not my outputs. And something to remember when you've got a Cat5 cable is one pair is being used for inputs and the other pair is being used for outputs. You can plug it in and it can show lock because it's getting clock from the console, which means you're going to have your outputs but not your inputs, not your return. And this is something we're going to actually go through in the practical later today, is almost 90 or 99% of the time when you've got those issues, it's one of those things. It's the card configuration that's wrong. And in normal scenarios where it's just simple console to rack, you don't come across that because people don't fiddle with it. The other issues when it comes to inputs and outputs not working is almost always cables. And you need to remember that, because just because something is showing a lock on any device doesn't mean all your ins and outs are working. It just means those pairs on the console, on that cable, is working. But the other pair, and this can also be with the same thing with fiber, you can plug your one fiber in and it's working in one direction, but the other fiber is maybe not working in the opposite direction. So if this is a scenario where the fiber that's coming from the console, say this was a fiber card and it's plugged in here, is working, and you can check it. It's on most systems, as soon as you introduce that fiber, you'll see a lock because the rack is seeing a clock and it's seeing digital signals. It's going like, sweet, I'm happy. So in that scenario, what's going to happen is, once again, we're going to have outputs but no inputs. And this happens often. Guys, they do their setups and they're rushed and they get their rig up and they put their monitors and they put their PA and they go home. The next morning they get there and then they go like, ooh, I don't have any band. No inputs from stage. Because they've plugged their playback from front of us locally. So that's working, and they're sending audio to their PA and they're sending audio to their monitors. Everything's hunky-dory. And the next morning they get a massive fright because they realize they don't have any ins, because the return's not working. So that's something. That's something I love about fiber, the fact that we can plug the one in and plug the other one out. So that this is the test that I've done. So it's slightly off topic, but this is going to help you. I plug the output from the console to the inputs of the stage rack. Then I see if I've got a lock, and I test it. Then I do the opposite. I take the output from the stage rack to the input of the console, see if I've got a lock. Great. Now we know fibers are working. Then I do a second test. I turn the two fibers around. So now inputs output and outputs input. And on the console. If it works that way, then we know our fiber is good. Now the second thing we need to test is whether we've got control. And this goes for any system in planet Earth. How do we know if we've got control? If we can pull the gain and we can switch the phantom on. If you can't do those things on any system, doesn't matter which system it is, you don't have control of your racks, and you should be extremely worried. So those are setup things we do when we are on our, tests we do when we are running our setups. And when it comes to Soundcraft, these things are very important because you are saving whatever stage rack we have into your show file. So you can actually corrupt your show file by not doing a proper test on your racks. If you start up the next morning and those racks are gone, or the console or the show file is remembering a rack from a different show, you actually going to do all your patching and switch on the console, and some of your ins and outs are going to be gone because you've done a hardware change. So checking whether the hardware, if you're a front of house engineer and you're the guest engineer, actually walking to stage and making sure that, listen, the stage racks that the console is seeing is the racks we actually have in reality. Those are all good things to do, and then you don't get any surprises. And then the third thing I do is I switch the whole system. I'll switch everything off. Stage rack, I'll switch off my console, everything. I power everything down, and I power it back on. Why? Because tonight when we go home, we're going to switch it off, right? And then we're going to get, tomorrow morning, we're going to switch it on, and then we're going to get a surprise if there's anything weird. If there's a cable that's freaking out, or a stage rack that's not happy, or patching that's been done odd, then we expose those problems immediately. So, slightly off topic, but within context, extremely important. You'll thank me later. Great. I'm going to put this guy offside. And we were talking about the layout. Okay, console layout, they're all the same. All the consoles are the same. We've got an output bank when we start up the show file and an input bank on the left-hand side. This console can be configured, and it's actually got a start scene to load inputs over both banks. So that's in your kind of front of house configuration. And at the moment, what I've loaded here is inputs here and outputs there, which should be considered monitor setup. This is not the console I will choose to mix monitors on. The reason why it's small is for a reason. This was designed for an application where we need fairly high input and output count, but we don't have the space. So theoretically, this is kind of a theater console. And there's a huge amount of these VI 1s and 1000s in theaters in Europe because they've got tiny little theaters with 200 seats, and there's physically not space for a 3000. So whether the engineer can afford one or want one, doesn't matter. There is no space, they're going to have to go with a 1000. And if you think about theater rehearsals, there is rehearsal time, so you will have time to get to all your layers, and obviously you can program your snapshots to serve you the right way. Something that's good to know as well when it comes to the layout, and I'm going to talk through the layout now, but there's a few things that's always important to remember when it comes to Soundcraft. When it comes to the screen, there's a design methodology, I'm going to call it that, called Vistonics. What does Vistonics mean? Vistonics is the concept, and it comes from Studer. Whenever I touch somewhere on the screen, that's always where I'll be working. I'll show it on this is the PC view. So wherever I'm touching, so for instance, I touch that EQ there, or the dynamic there, it takes me directly to the dynamics on that specific. So there's no like select and then click on dynamics, or select and click on EQ. What I want to do is I want to go to electric, and I want to push the buses. That's right there. If I want to use my compression, it's right there. There's my EQ, there's my input section. So this is the whole idea behind Vistonics. Another thing that's important to know is that my Vistonic pages actually, it's 2 layers over each other. I've got a selection mode and a deselection mode. So it's showing me different information. When I deselect it, it's showing my user, which is this guy here. Where is it? It's these guys, user selection. In this case, it's in-ear monitor number 1, and it's over all the channels. So it's like global mode, if you want to call it that. As soon as I select the EQ, it overrides that. So it's as simple as clicking and mixing. Why is this important? Because when we're working on digital consoles or hardware, same as a phone, we've got our phone and we've got one screen, but we're using the same screen for many things, right? We use it for whatever, WhatsApp and to Google and everything, and we'll just swipe through the screens as we need it. Digital consoles work in the same manner. We're using the same faders for different things, and that's why we have banks. So I mean, now it's bank A, now it's B, and so on and so forth. This is amazing, and it's great because now we've got a console with a huge amount of inputs, and it's relatively small. If we had to have 96 faders here, I mean, it'll be off the table there. And Rian would be holding the other end on that side. It's just not practical. So obviously this is how you get it wrong. The evil of this is that we are now using a huge amount of our energy flipping between different places and not actually mixing. And you can very quickly become busy on a console and not mix at all. So that's what we want to get away. So what's the solution? Soundcraft's solution is Vistonics. Is the fact that you don't have to select at the bottom and then go into a sub menu and go and look for the EQ there, whatever, say it was there. How do we EQ? Well, you just click on the EQ and you grab the EQ and that's it, done. It speeds this whole thing up. And when you start working with large channel counts, you start to realize the value of this, how important this is, because you can spend all your time just going through these pages and not actually getting to your mix. So that's just something that I always rave about. I mix a lot of shows where I spin the console, so we've got 120 ins before we use effects, and I'm doing 24 or 25 or 26 stereo mixes for artists, and it's a lot of work. And when we're working the console and not the mix, it becomes a huge problem. We're actually not being good sound engineers. And I always tell this little story, going on a rant again. Always tell this little story. It's you go to a festival and it's interesting. There's like 30,000 people and everyone's looking at the band except one person. The front of house engineer is looking at the console, which is it's the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest thing in the world. It's like no one is looking at the hardware. Everyone's enjoying the band except the engineer. It's like he's working the console, because working some consoles are hard work, and that's not what we want to do. So I really believe a good console is simple to work and it's easy to get anywhere. It's easy to change EQs, compression. I mean, those are things we use all the time. To send something to a bus should be quick. I shouldn't need to click something and click an EQ and then put my hand in front of the screen and try and EQ. That's ridiculous. You're spending a huge amount of time not mixing, and that adds up. It adds up in you looking down and not looking at the band. And it definitely has an effect on how we mix and how things sound. So Vistonics, selection mode, deselection mode, very important to remember that. I'm not going to go into too much depth because we just don't have the time today. We're going to talk about the screen now, and I'm going to switch to the computer. So yes, our input screen, we can touch anywhere. Inputs at the top. A layout is exactly the same as an analog console. So where do we find inputs on an analog console, right? This little guy, right at the top. And it's hanging. So we're just sorting out Facebook. There we go. Are we back? Facebook's failing us. We do have decent internet connection, so I'm not sure why it's doing that. Maybe I should at some stage pause that on my side. I was at Dynamics. This is our Dynamics tab there, and then obviously we go over to our buses. The first 16 and then 17 to 24, and then our routing is here. So we will do left and right. We're going to have a closer look at this in a moment. And obviously, just remember this selection. So selection mode and deselection mode. It is quite important because there's some of the features you're not going to see. For instance, when you want to make your aux pre and post, you need to select it there. And when you deselect it, you're going to see an overview. So there is places on the console where you need to be aware of whether you are selecting it or deselecting it. Or maybe just go to the other place where it becomes very... Just make sure you've deselected it. Just a good to know. I'm going to go out here. Looks like our internet is struggling today. I hope we're not going to have this all morning. So that's one thing. Vistonics, obviously, where we touch. For everyone that's at home and can't see this, the top part of the screen is a touch screen, and then the bottom part of the screen is there's a piece of glass here or plastic, but the rotaries are there. So how do we manipulate? We just pull the rotary up. I know it's slightly blurred on the screen there. And there's a little button here, which is very dark. And this is how we interact with the bottom part of the screen. So we switch on the EQ. I'm changing that there. Right, so let's quickly go to our inputs. I select this input on SM58. I take the rotary, and this is how in that band I'll cut or boost. But it also, the little button now allows me to switch that band on or off. And it will toggle between being gray and being red. You can also switch off the whole EQ, for instance, when it looks like that. Obviously, if you want to see if you did a good EQ or a bad EQ, this is a nice way to check it. So this is how we work. And that's the whole idea of Vistonics, is where we touch is where we'll be working. You actually see when you touch it, there's a little eye that comes there, which means this is where you're looking on the console, and it's highlighted in white. And you'll never have to touch something and then go and find it somewhere else on the console. It just doesn't work like that. That's not how VIs work. So if you work on consoles that work like that, you can forget about that idea for now, because it even carries over on the rest of the console. The stuff we use all the time, like for instance manipulating our banks, like I said, this is where we skip between the input side. We've got one of these up here as well. This is where we skip between our output banks. Each of these sections, so this is output bank selection, input bank selection, these are our mute groups and our VCAs. I'm going to just read it out because I know you won't be able to read that. This is the programming and the selection for the encoders. Here we've got user-defined buttons. And here we've got our monitoring, left and right, snapshot section, talkback section, and this little button here is for our main. All these sections here, wherever they are, it's got a little button that says setup, which means if we want to manipulate this part of the console, we don't actually even have to go into the main menu. So if I want to manipulate a user section of the console or user page, I just select setup and I select the one I want to manipulate, and it comes up immediately there. Also with mute groups, if I want to set up mute groups, say over those channels, it says guest, I'll select it, I'll select the mute group, and that's it. Now I've created a mute group there. So you can see how that's carrying over, this whole idea of keeping us on the console and keeping us out of the menus. So there is a few things in the main menu, and we'll talk about it now. But it's normally not things we use while we're mixing. It's kind of setup tools or monitoring tools. I'm not so worried about Facebook because is it still going? It's failing us. So mute group setups right there. When it comes to manipulating the output pages, that button there. User-defined keys, monitor section, our snapshot section, our talkback section, so on and so forth. So the thing you guys need to get now at this stage is obviously how we use Vistonics, and then also where we find this and how we manipulate it. When it comes to setting up pages, for instance, it's quite self-explanatory, but I just want to mention it. There's the layers. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Refers to these guys here. Right? Why would that be? Because the console is set up in a way that there's a fixed part to the console that we can't change. So when we start up the console, fixed bank A, B, C, D, E has been fixed. You can't move those faders around. But the users, we can move around as we please. And if you work on the bigger consoles that's got a lot of faders, like the 3000, these are normally blank. So when you go into a user I don't have any blank because I've populated them all. But for instance, user 5, you'll see there's only 3 channels on. There's a VCA and a channel called Neo and another channel called Ambient. On the big consoles, they are normally blank. So the scenario is when we're mixing and we now have a song that's only got one guitar and we need the reverb for that guitar and the vocal, but they're in way different places on the console. So you've patched 90 channels or 100 channels, say on a big console, and they're far apart, and you want to just put those 2 channels together or 3 channels together. You will use a user for that, or a guest engineer who maybe doesn't know the console so well, so you're going to want to be nice to him and you want to maybe put his band channels together. Then we can do that. I'm going to quickly demonstrate how we do it. So I'm going to push setup. In this case, I'm on user 5. So I'm just firstly going to clear it. So in slot number 3, I've got a VCA. I'm going to say no. There's also a ambient channel. So now you can check it's completely blank. There's nothing there. So let's say we want to populate something in the first slot. I'm just pushing. So that's going slot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, user 1 to 5. And slot number 1, or fader number 1, I'm going to make it David. And number 2, I'm going to make it Rob. And number 3 is maybe my SM58. And that's it. At this stage, you can decide whether you want these faders to always be there, or whether you only want them there for the snapshot. And there's a little button there that says isolate, input, fader, assign, isolation. You can decide whether you want it on or off. If it's on, these faders will hang here forever. If you switch it off, it'll only be there for that snapshot, which makes this console obviously really versatile, because you can now use the same faders over and over for each different snapshot. Mute group, very quickly, you just select the mute you want and then select the channels you want, and it is simple as that. There's also an indication on the console right there of which mute groups you are busy looking at. And this little button says display here, so you can look, these little LEDs can either be mutes or they can be VCA 1 to 8 or 9 to 16. Don't worry too much about this. I'm not going to go into detail there, because actually when you push the setup button, there's a nice explanation of how this section works, which is quite cool. Obviously, VCA setups are also here. When we go to our output section, also there's a part that's fixed, and you can't read this now because it's too small on the GoPro, I know. But the button that says VCA, the location of these VCAs here are fixed. So it's 1 to 8. A, B, C, D, and E you can manipulate any way you want. They have been populated as buses, so 8, 16, 24 buses, and then there's one blank, so you can use that one for whatever you want. And then also E has already been populated with VCA 9 to 16. People always ask me, why is there only 4 mute groups? The reason is that a VCA is a mute group as well, right? So I'm guessing everyone knows what a VCA is. So it's a control group, controls the level of all the other faders. So how do we set up a VCA? Setup, I select VCA 1. What do I want to send to VCA 1? Say everything on this bank. And I'm going to select it. You'll see what I'm doing at the moment. I'm using multi-select. So it allows me to select a range like that. And I can also deselect a range. Or I can decide I only want, say that, or some of them. Oh, these are all stereo channels. There. So now I've selected the first 3 and the bass and the electric like that. Now, when I go out of my setup, I'm going to test my VCA by muting it. And you can see the channels are following. So once I've assigned these channels to a VCA, when I push the fader up and down, I'm basically changing the level like this. The fader is not moving, but whatever is assigned to that VCA is being controlled level-wise by this fader here. I suggest always running VCAs. It's just a good thing to do. Even if you mix monitors, set them up and have them there, because it doubles up as a nice mute group. And also there's some really cool tools when it comes to monitoring as well. There's a tool called VCA mode. Oh my word, I'm getting completely, let me get the wording right. aux VCA mode, and I'll explain that tomorrow. It also gives us a VCA within each aux. And I know that is a bit of a mind twister, but it separates the VCA from the front of house mix if you're doing monitors from front of house and all the auxes, and I'll demonstrate it tomorrow. It makes more sense when you hear it, and that's what we'll do tomorrow. So that's the explanation on how to set up a VCA is right there. You can obviously label it if you want to. These are our input faders, output selection. Something I just wanted to mention at this stage. So obviously, when it comes to using our outputs, and we're going to revisit this, the most common thing to do when you're mixing into a aux is to obviously mix monitors. There's a button here that says follow output solo, and while we're on the surface, I maybe just want to mention it. This is how we flip to faders. If it's off, it's only selecting the aux, and it's not actually flipping the faders to that aux. And I'm hoping that you guys can see this nice and clear on the GoPro. When follow output solo is on, I'm selecting in-ear monitor mix number 1. And now these input faders have turned orange. And this is how we know that we are now sending these faders, these inputs, into that aux. So these colors are there for a reason. It looks cool, but they serve a purpose. You'll actually notice when I skip along to the groups, they green. So the same thing happened on the input faders. And when I go to the matrices, they go this beautiful sea blue color. All right, so good to know. So obviously when we're mixing monitors, we'll be skipping or selecting our auxes and sending faders to them, or inputs to them. There's some buttons at the top here. The one says function and the one says ISO. Isolation is basically recall safe. I'm hoping that today at some stage we're going to have enough time to dial into that. It's one of the topics that I normally spend some time on. But in simple, what it does is when you have selected a channel like that, so in this case input 8, if I make a snapshot here, so I've created 2 snapshots here. What you'll see is on my cue number 4, fader number 7, which is input 7, is moving, and 8 is not. The reason is that this whole strip, this whole input, is in isolation mode. Some other manufacturers call it recall safe or safe mode. Normally the word safe is in there. So what it does is, it's a channel that we don't want affected by our snapshots. Ooh. So this is one channel, and it's normally something like our playback or our MC. So obviously when we're programming, we're creating snapshots. If there's anyone who doesn't understand a term like snapshots or show file, please just post it on the comments. Same with you guys here, and then I'll explain it more. So the idea of a snapshot is the whole console is laying out, and we take a photo, and then we can go back to that photo, right? And put that console in that state. So obviously when we mix a festival, we're creating a snapshot for each band. So we can name it, we can call it band number 1 or whatever. Chili Peppers and U2 on the same stage, can you believe it? And you can give them a name, and then obviously when after rehearsal you update that snapshot and you can go back to it. But there's also always some channels that you want not affected by the snapshot, like your MC coming up and down. You want to be able to open the MC channel and then go to another snapshot and not have the fader go down again. So that's called recall safe, and it's very easy. As soon as I push it, you'll see the whole strip goes purple. So the console's got 3 modes when it comes to recall safe. It's got everything off, everything on, and also something called partial isolation, which allows me to pick something out. So now everything is isolated on that channel except the dynamics. And tomorrow I'm going to show you how to use it, because this is one of the most powerful tools when it comes to the Surface. It allows you to actually copy and paste features and also build an incredible show file without really putting any thought into it. I just want to mention this. Most consoles work like this, but I think some people don't know it, is the fact that when you take a snapshot, all the metadata, whatever you're doing on the console is being stored. Yes. Whether there's recall safe on or off. Keeping that in mind, you can use this partial isolation tool to build a killer show file in the festival scenario, and I'm going to explain tomorrow. It's also one of those things I will need to demo. This little key here called F, it's a function key, and its primary function is to flip between the 2 inputs. We're going to take a closer look on the computer now at that. The reason why it's called function, because it's got a second feature, and this is something I need to demonstrate here. One of the few little things that are under the main menu is settings, and you can see there's hardly anything here, very little. But there's something, you can change the function of this little F key to be either input 2 or to be strip lock. So if I put it to strip lock here and I push the F key, there's a little lock there. Let's quickly see on the computer. So I go here, go to settings, and I change this to strip lock there. Close that menu. Let's say those DJ. Ooh, I don't actually know if this is something. I need to now go and look for my F key. That little guy there. Once I click there, there's a little lock there, which means if I now go between my layers, DJ channels are staying there. So that's a typical scenario where you've mixed yourself into a corner. And you now all of a sudden realize you need to go to layer D, but if you do, you're not going to have the DJ on hand, which you're going to either have to kill the DJ channel early and then open the podium mic, or you're going to have to let the podium mic, you understand? You're in that conundrum. Open the podium mic and just live with a spill. So what you can do then is you just lock it momentarily. And once you take it out, it'll bounce back to normal function. So those are the 2 functions. You can also lock a whole bank. And it's now unfortunately something I can't demonstrate because we only have 1 input bank. But on all the bigger consoles, whenever we touch the screen here, it normally jumps this bank here. Right? So when you're seeing clipping or feedback here on the meter bridge, you can touch it and it will take this bank there. Because this console only has 1 input bank, it puts it here, which is kind of silly. But obviously, this is an exception. This layout that's so small is an exception. Normally, the VI consoles, they are actually quite big consoles, and you normally have a fair amount of faders. In this lock mode, you can pop on the function key and it'll lock the whole bank. So say you've got a setup where you've got all your podium mics here. Say it's a corporate, and you're going from podium mics into band. What you can actually do is you can go to wherever it is on the console, select it, it'll take it here, lock it, and now you'll be able to go anywhere on the console, and that bank will stay exactly where it is. So in that moment, it gives you that option of just bringing those 2 layers together, or these 2 layers together with the other one. And then when you're done, you pop it out. we often mix shows, not me, but the front of house engineers on the shows that I work on. They've got big shows with a huge amount of vocals, and the openings and the closings are always challenging because so many vocals. So this feature comes in so handy there. If you lay out the console clever, you can actually pop some of the vocals on there and get a second engineer to just help you with that opening or that closing and to ride those faders. Quite a nifty little feature, so that's that. We've got the rotaries here. Same as always, the input gain and the threshold on the gate is two things that are fixed when it comes to these rotaries. So in this case, now we're changing the threshold on the gate, and now we're changing the input. Interesting thing to notice is at the moment, you'll see the little line stop is right in the middle, which tells me something about the input on this channel is that is a digital in. How do I know that? Because if we go, I'm locked, or what's going on here? Where is my microphone? Oh, here's a mic called, it's this microphone called SM58. You'll notice here these little LEDs are going all the way to the bottom, and when I turn it up, it follows it. So if I have to patch a digital input here, don't worry about the patching, we're going to have a close look at this in a moment. I know someone's freaking out somewhere. You'll see on this channel it starts at the top, and on this channel the little LEDs stop there, which means this is a physical headphone, head amp. It's a preamp patch there. There's a digital, because obviously a preamp needs to start at the bottom. It can't go lower than the lower sensitivity on, But a digital can go up and down. So it's just, the little indication there gives us just a quick overview. When you look at the console, you go like, oh, preamp, and that's a digital in. So that's either a Dante in or a MADI in or something else. That's just good to know. Which means that is now a trim. Okay, that's why I mention it. When we turn this, it's trimming up and down. Yep, let's go, yeah. There. That is, if you see, if I'm turning on the console now, the trim is going up and down, right? On DJ left. When I go to SM58, the gain's going up and down, which proves my point. So whenever we patch a preamp, we have a gain and a trim. Whenever it's a digital patch point, we only have a trim. And obviously the rotaries tell us exactly the same story, which is good news, I guess. How do we change the function of the rotaries? It's these guys here. Those are fixed. So the ones are fixed are input gain or trim, depending on what it is, threshold and pan. Then we also have a setup button. Once again, see, the setup button is popping up everywhere. And we can change the function to whatever we want. So I'm going to say it's going to be bus number 8. I'm going to say set. Now when I go user 1 and I'm dialing this up and down, I am manipulating. We should see the same thing. Yeah, when I'm dialing that up and down, we see I'm actually manipulating. The rotary is now manipulating that aux, which is vocal effects. Okay. And we've got 2 users that we can do whatever we want. There's quite a lot of stuff. It can be input gain, trim, high pass filter on the EQ, low pass filter on the EQ, a delay time, input delay if you want, either the rough or the fine. Yeah. When you guys in front of the console, you can go play. All the buses can be manipulated, direct out and gains, and so on and so forth. The gain on the direct out, the trim on the direct out. Sorry, can be manipulated that way. Great. We're kind of moving this way. There's a little button here that says last and next. This refers to our cues. It's not broken. It's just normally off because it's quite a dangerous little button. If you're leaning on the console here, thinking that you're cool, you might push it and go to the next band. So it's normally not on. You have to switch it on under the settings. There, it's that guy there. So on the offline editor, you go here, you go to settings, and it's this guy here. I'm not going to switch it on. I normally leave this off till I'm ready to run the show, because I have gotten myself in trouble with that once or twice. Go to a mute scene. Then right at the bottom, we are looking, sorry, I'm doing this on the top view because it doesn't make a lot of sense on the offline editor. There's a button called Gang, and there's a button called Solo Clear. Solo Clear is quite simple. The console's normally set up in this mode, which is auto mode, which allows you to multi-select by holding in one select and then adding them in. So now we're soloing all those channels. And then obviously we can clear them. You can also change this to only be one at a time. It's under this section, and we're gonna give this section a good overview tomorrow under monitoring. At the moment, it's solo mode. I do like auto mode on solo. I think it's a fantastic feature because what it's actually doing is, I must maybe actually demonstrate this. Let's play something on Pro Tools. We are sound engineers, right? We should listen to some music at some. We should listen to some music at some stage. So that's my bus. The amazing thing that this does is, I've muted so many things. I'm destroying this. I'm infamous for destroying show files when I train. So when we go to the bass, for instance, you'll notice that it is a PFL. And how do we know that? Because if I go to a second channel, you'll actually hear the bass going to drop and go to its AFL position. I'm going to go bass and overhead. Hold in the first one. Now it's PFL. And this is actually a really cool way of working, because normally when you want to listen to one channel at a time, it means we are dialing in EQs or dynamics or stuff. And there's no panning involved, which is great. So when you're EQing a tom and you're selecting only the one channel, that tom will be in the middle. It won't be panned off to the side. As soon as you select more than one channel, you are listening now post-fade. So let's quickly go. So that's PFL. PFL, this goes to AFL. Oh, and the song stops. This is now that one place in the show where he's actually talking quite a bit. There we go. I've got a band. So you can check now, I've selected all these channels and it is PFL. And we've included the panning. So you can hear the overheads are panned if you guys have your headphones in. That's auto mode, you can change it, and obviously AFL, PFL. You can also clear it by just pushing any button. All the select features work like that. Great, so obviously if you want to now go over multiple layers, sometimes it makes sense not doing auto cancel. You can switch it off there. Say make it PFL only. Now you'll see we've got this one channel vibe going at the moment. I like it there. I think it's quite cool. You can also switch the auto cancel off. So now you'll see the only way to clear that is to actually hit the clear button. Once you get used to actually using the selects as cancels, you never want to go back. It works really, really well. Next thing, so obviously something that people always or very often ask me is, how do we do global functions on the console? Because the console doesn't, in the settings menu, have a global pre or post, for instance, or stuff like that. Switch off all the phantoms. what's another example? Or switch on all the channels or off all the channels, or doing clears or patching, you know. All those things are, I don't know why my camera always goes off. It's extremely irritating. All those features are, yeah, when it comes to gang. So let's first explain in simple terms what is a gang. I just want to go somewhere in the console. So a gang is momentarily locking channels together like that. So we've locked the channels together. You see the ons and offs are locked. We can go ISOs on and off or functions. We can also do a global EQ. You can see all the EQs are following. I'm just doing some crazy EQing so you guys can see it. It also allows us to change, for instance, all the pre's and posts of this. So in simple terms, we can select certain channels in our gang group and we can make the changes we want. I'm going to show you how to do multiple patching or ripple patching, sequential patching, I guess the right word, as well with it. It works the same as a soloist. You push the gang and then you've got this range. You can work with the range, or you can do certain channels. You can add them in, change there, then add that one in, you know, get yourself in trouble that way. Simply, that's how it works. But it also allows us to do the whole console. And this is sometimes where people tend to get confused. It's the fact they want to say, I want AUX 1 to 8 all be pre because I'm mixing front of us and we need those AUXes to feed in-ears on stage or monitors on stage. And now they're getting frustrated because they're going, yeah, and they're changing each one on their own. So how would we do that? Very simply, we'll push the gang, so we're going to switch it on, and then we're going to hold it in the second time. Now you check, it's gone blue there, but what's also happened is every single channel on this console has been selected, right? They're all ganged, everything. So at this stage we want to be quite careful because the changes we're making now is over the whole console, over all 96 channels. But it's cool because now we can change our pre's and posts. So there's a little button there, it says pre and post. Select it. Obviously it pertains to buses. And now we can say, effects we don't want to do. But let's say in-ear monitor 4, we want to make it all post. Boom. Afterwards, we want to clear our gang. So I'm just going to hold in any button. All cleared. And we can now go anywhere on the console. And just to prove to you that I'm not lying. If we go here to, say, this channel, yeah, and we say pre and post, if I can find it, there we go. You'll see in-ear monitor 4 is now in its post position. Right over the whole console. So it doesn't matter if I go to bank C, channel 1, which is keyboard 1, left, they've all gone into their post position. So that's how we do global changes that way. That's the primary function of gang. This is how I like to use gang. So I mix and have mixed a lot of gospel. And in South Africa, you know, that means at least, best case scenario, 8 or 14 or 16 BVs, right? So their setup is one of the tools that I always use gang. So let's say 8 BVs. Small band today, only 8 BVs. We select them. So I'm just going to clear just to make sure I'm not manipulating any weird stuff on a layer that I'm not seeing. Great, I've got that going. Awesome. Now I'm going to say I want to do input patching. So this is one of the tools. And I've just clicked on my inputs there. I think it's going to help you guys if you see this close up. So this is where I'm working. So I want to make sure you guys are following along so you can see. If I'm switching the dynamics on, they're all following because these channels are now ganged. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top here, and I'm going to do some input patching. So I'm going to click on the first one, and I'm going to actually see if I can do it on the console, and it's going to hopefully follow through there. I'm going to patch Maddie. So you'll see what's happened. I patched the first channel there. So while we're here, we might as well look at patching. You click that button there, and this opens all our patch points. On the right hand side, we can say where we want to patch from. So it's lexicon out, which is fix. Our MADI stream. So this is a MADI card that's got no control off. Stage rack or local. Local refers to the physical outputs on the back of the console. Okay. So in this case, it's those few mic ins, a few AES, and then obviously the Dante and the MADI. Okay. So we can maybe just recap that. I've now done it on the console, and I followed through on the mixer, on the offline editor. I'm going to see if I can do the same the other way around. A little bit more tedious because I don't have my fingers on the faders. So I've ganged all those channels together. As you can see, the sign is I can switch them on and off, and the faders are following. We're going to the inputs. So how do we do sequential patching? We have to go to the first channel in that bank. And at the moment it's patched at that first Dante channel, but let's make it to the mics. So it's going to ask me, do I want to sequentially patch all this selected range of gang strip? I'm going to say yes. And now at the bottom here, above the little name, you'll see it's gone mic to 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 8, which is great. So say this was a BV section. Obviously, the next thing we want to do is we want to add some EQ. So say they're using beta 58s. We're going to take out that mid-range. We're going to change the EQ a little bit. We're going to put in a low cut, like so. Sure, it's looking a bit rough there. Let's dial a little bit back. And let's say we want to help that low cut a little bit. Just on that cutoff point, and let's say we're going to make it's not bright enough, and we're going to make it slightly brighter. That's all the EQs done over 8 channels. We can ask them to sing, add some compression, and send them all to vocal effects number 1. Oop, not a little bit too much, like that. And maybe they all need to go left and right. So we're now using the gang as a setup feature to help us to get the setup going very quickly. And obviously, if you're one of those people, I don't work like that, but I know some people, they write their patch list exactly how they're going to lay out their console, which makes sense. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I tend to patch quite creatively, but if someone who works like that, and you know you're going to work on the console, what you can do now is you can label your console or do your setup on the offline editor, put that show file on the console, and just ripple patch the whole console, right? All 64 channels. So you just say gang the whole console, all those first 8 banks, 64 channels, and then say channel 1 goes to first channel, which is kick, and your patching is basically done. So it helps you to get somewhere very quickly. You can also do the opposite. Sometimes you're working on a show file and there's old patching on that show file, and you maybe just want to take it out, so you can also unpatch the whole console that way. So where did we work on C? So we can say gang, select them, and there's unpatch, the first one. And it's not doing it for some reason. I think I've fried this. My training show file is not in a good shape anymore. Let's go, yeah. None. Yes. So what you do is, so this is the patch point 2. You say none, and it says, are you sure you want to clear all the stripped gangs? You say yes. And now we've unpatched all those channels again. So we can obviously do the opposite. So anywhere you need to make quick changes, the gang is quite a nifty tool. I hope it makes sense. I'm going to move along. Copy and paste features there. The simple way of copying and pasting is the following. I'm going to do a crazy EQ here so you guys can see it on Facebook. Say copy. Select my EQ. Say paste. And you can just drag it along, just like that. There's some sub-menus when it comes to copy and pasting, how to save things in the library and do some clearing. That's something we're going to touch on tomorrow. But what you need to know for now is it works exactly the same as a computer. When you say copy, it's basically saving that into its RAM or for that moment. So I can say copy, that flat EQ, and then switch off the copy feature, and it will still remember that flat EQ. When I say paste, right? So we're adding one thing into the copy feature at a time. It doesn't just have to be one feature. It can be multiple. So we can say I want to do that, say that 58 EQ we had there, and the compression. That's maybe another way of doing it, and it needs to go to the effects. Then we say copy, and we select all the blocks we want to copy. Boom, boom, boom. Oops, not that one. Now we say paste. And it's pasting it along, right? Makes sense. One little word of caution, and this, when you say copy and you say select, you are now copying everything on that strip, including the name. So let's quickly go there. Where am I on D? So I'm busy pasting on this side. So I've done from the right. You can see I've done. This is the channel that I've copied and I've pasted it there. And you can see as I go along, it's changing the name as well. That's why I don't use a select to do copy and paste. Be specific about what you want to copy and paste. Otherwise, you've labeled your whole console and it's been labeled BV123, or you've actually went and put in the BV's names, which is not a good thing to do. I suggest you guys do it. It's nice calling people on their names and not drummer, kick. Yeah, just go David Kick. That's a lot kinder. So if you put in the names and now you're copying, pasting, and you are losing all that information. So be specific about what you want to copy and paste. Especially when you do it in drum kits, says Rian. So I'm just going to flatten that first EQ. So let's say the flat EQ is exactly what we want to copy. We're going to say copy, select, paste, and then just pop it around. Don't use the select. Even in settings from here, be specific about what you want to copy and paste. It's hardly ever that you want to paste everything anyway. I mean, that's kind of an odd thing to do. All right, that's copy and paste. I hope I'm doing okay for time. How are we doing for time? 1:30. So we're halfway in, eh? Till 1 o'clock. Is everyone still awake on Facebook? Rian? No comments. No one is awake. No questions. It's either very boring or they know everything. I don't know. Okay. Great. There's some Bastonics features here that's good to be aware of. This is basically where we look at pre and post. Also, the panning of AUX is here. These two rotaries here can also be assigned to a specific bus. And this is something I never ever do, but I'm going to try and demonstrate it. So let's say we click fast assign, it's that button there, and we want it to always be a keyboard monitor. I think we do it like that. Ooh, fast assign, select. Now what's happened is when we haven't selected anything on screen, it's now that guy there. I've actually went to drum, so I'm going to go fast assign keyboard. So basically, when we in the deselected mode, these rotaries are now doing keyboard monitor. So that's just a quick way of going there. I've never used it, but you're welcome to. There's also a user here that you can assign the same way we do the rotaries. So you can use those rotaries and those rotaries to send to buses if that is the way that you work. Talkback section is up here. The easiest way to get the talkback going is in the following manner. And I'm going to actually ask Koketsu to help me quickly. On the back of the just unplug quickly channel 1. I've got this microphone here, and it's plugged in the moment, it's plugged into mic input number 1, which is not a problem. I can assign that to, yeah, you can unplug it, yeah. You can, that's my helper, you're not seeing, he's out of shot, but his name is Koketsu, I'm going to call him K. And so thanks man, you can have a seat. This is this guy here. It was plugged into mic 1. The easiest way to get talkback going is just to take a normal dynamic microphone, pop it in there, boom, give it a bit of a gain. Quarter past is normally quite a nice place to start on something like this. You go into the setup menu, and I guess this is something you guys want to see close up, right? So we now, yeah, so it's this section here. Don't get confused, talkback section. So I've plugged in my mic, and now we want to send it to some buses, which is probably the most common thing when it comes to routing talkback. We want to be able to send it to monitors, right? So we've got these 3 presets, preset 1, 2, and 3 are these guys here. And it's super simple. You click on preset, and you just say where you want it to go. So I want it to go to in-ear, monitor, 1 to 4. And now, believe it or not, when we talk on the mic, we are sending it to 1 to 4. And I switch it off preset, it's gone. So I mean, it's literally like 10 seconds, right? That's how we get talkback going. It also allows you to, you can use one of your presets. By the way, did you guys notice whenever I'm working on the console and I want to clear something, I use this none? Very handy, especially if this thing is going like everywhere and you want to change it. It's actually quite tedious to undo it. So you can just go, boom. This is everywhere on the console. Patch points, inputs, outputs, oscillator sign, they all have a little none. So just keep an eye out for that. So let's say preset 1, great. It's going to be our vocalists, fantastic. Preset 2 is going to be our band. They are using wedges. There's only 2 today, I don't know why. And preset number 3 is going to be our evacuation microphone. Right? We want to tell everyone to get out of the room in the case of an emergency. Yeah, something like that. Marianne's sarcasm coming at you. Okay, so preset 1, there we go, 1 to 4. Preset 2 is the band, which is bass monitor and keyboard monitor. And I just want to make sure that we don't shout into you guys' ears. No, you are not. Ooh, there is a monitor. There is a monitor patch to that. I don't know if you guys can hear it. So that will be your evac microphone. You can obviously manipulate this to be whatever you want. There is also, you can also multi-patch them. So I sometimes make one that talks to everyone and then one who talks separately to maybe the band and the other one to the in-ears. Or the front of house engineer. Or comms, it can be whatever you want. Yeah, or the main, or the MD, yeah. So those are the 3 presets, and they always talk to buses. So it's groups, matrices, left and right. So it has to be a bus. You can, however, also assign it to a channel. That's this guy here. So this goes to a specific output. So this may be a creative way to link to the front of house console. via Dante, or via MADI, or via AS1, or via a analog 17. You can click 17, then run a cable from 17 to the front of house console, and then you've created a link. This I want to talk about this now because I really like how this works, but I'm not going to. I'm going to restrain myself because there is some cool features, but today we're doing basic overview. You can also talk internally. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And externally is that guy there. It's talking to an output. While we're here, oscillator is there. We can switch it on and off. And our options is pink noise, white noise, or a sine wave. And we can maybe assign that to a bus. And I need to be careful that we don't blow anyone's expensive in-ears. Okay, you guys should be hearing that tone now. So there's a few things that need to happen to send a oscillator to a bus. The first thing is it needs to be on, so it needs to be yellow. The second thing is oscillator to bus button needs to be on. And then the third thing is we need to assign it to a specific bus, like that. We can obviously change the frequency, and we can obviously make it pink noise or white noise. I guess white noise is the one we'll use most often, because then we can hear our drivers are all working well. So this is quite a nice and easy and quick way to test, for instance, our monitors. This is how we send it to a bus, but we can also send it to a specific output there. So once again, we can use it as a testing tool, send it to a stage box, the last channel in the stage box, and the crew can use that output to test whatever they need to test. We can also send our tone, and this is actually something that's quite handy. I sometimes use this external out to talk to comms or OBs. So you can also say, switch that on, and then when you push that button there, it's sending the tone to that external patch point, which is here. So we can say that output L06 is going to the comm system or the OBs. And now we can leave it on, and they can do their patching till they hear it. And then once they hear it, they know they're in the winnings, and we can then thereafter just switch it off. Now, so something that's extremely cool is the fact that we can also send that oscillator to any of the inputs. And I just want to make sure, yeah, maybe don't stress about this. We're going to talk through this now. There's a little button here that says oscillator. So make sure the fader is down on D. When I now solo channel 56, you'll see it's there. What I love about this is the fact that we haven't unpatched our physical in and out, which is something I despise on consoles that do that. You want to send the signal generator to a specific channel, and then as soon as you do it, it unpatches the patch point, which is so pointless. Because why would we want to do this? Is because if we're sending this channel to a specific direct out, the only way to test it is one of two ways. You need someone to actually make noise or talk on that channel, but if you're alone in the venue, the only way to test it is to be able to send an oscillator there. So if this channel was a hi-hat and it's going to a personal monitoring system and it's a direct patch, yeah, there's no way of testing this on your own. So this is why we need this extremely important feature. Very handy. All right, I'm just going to finish with the last bit of layout stuff, and then we're going to talk through this Vistonics page. I know everyone is wondering why I'm going this way around, but anyway, snapshots are there. So in simple terms, a snapshot takes a photo of the console. So in this case, these faders are there. I say update, go to the next position, put the faders weird, say store, Now, if I skip between my snapshots, you'll see my faders are going into different positions. So the simple example is a band, different bands. This was band, different bands, same venue. That was band number 1, and that is band number 2. So they're not using those channels. Update, and that is a mute scene. Update. Mute scene, band 1, band 2, mute scene. You have to run snapshots, please, people. Everyone runs snapshots. Even if you're mixing one band, one mic, one guitar, why? It's extremely important to always have a snapshot because it's a recovery place. If you do something wrong on the console by accident, maybe you're tired, you push something, and you don't know how to get out of the situation. Maybe this happens, and you're not getting those channels, and you're on this layer. A quick fix is just going, there we go, recall that scene again, and then we're back. If you get yourself in a bad situation, and you don't know what you've done is, you might need to switch the whole console off and switch it back on without saving to get back to a specific place. If you have a snapshot, even if it's one guitar with effects and a vocal, you want a snapshot. It's a recovery. Also, some consoles will use that snapshot. When the show file goes corrupt, it will use that first snapshot to get you going again. So always, first thing you do, you switch on the console, blank scene, snapshot. Ooh. There's a ghost in the camera. Okay. So even someone asked me the other day, he said, but I mix in church and everything has to be mixed live because we never know what the pastor's going to do. I'm like, okay. So you never know what the pastor's going to do. Great. That is the band. That is the band without the pastor. That is only the pastor. And this is the pastor and the band soft. That scenario there. Update. So now we can still mix this thing live. No problem, right? But if the pastor goes off stage, boom. If it's only the band, only the pastor, boom. If it's the pastor and the band. Now we can put a fade time on all of those if we want to be fancy. Like that. Ba-doom, it's fading in. Right, only the pastor. Altar call, pastor and the band. No pastor. So everyone on planet Earth needs snapshots. I always say rather have a snapshot you don't need than being in a situation where you need the snapshot and now you're like, oh, I'm actually in trouble. Especially on a console like this that's small and only has few little faders. Now you can mix the band and not worry about that. When you're done and you need to go to that scenario where it's only the pastor, snapshot 5, you can mix, and just when you're done, just go recall, and it will take you to that snapshot, regardless of where on the console you are. And you can skip it around and change. So let's quickly have a quick look at that. Snapshots is also something that I love talking about, so I can probably keep you busy here for a while. So it's this section here. Snapshot. So we're taking a photo of the console essentially. On the offline editor, it's here in the middle. So once again, we say setup. This is what it looks. It's blank. It should never look like this. So we're going to say store. And I always start with a scene called start. There it is. So, I mean, if all goes bad, we have one snapshot that we can go back to that's at least got all the patching and all the naming. Because that's probably the worst thing that can happen is we're in a scenario where you've now set up the whole console and you lose power, for instance, and you haven't saved a new show file and you haven't saved a snapshot, and you lose everything. And now you've got a few thousand people that's waiting for you to patch the console. That might take you 30 minutes, you know, if it's a big band. So I always do the same thing. I recall a new show file and then I make one snapshot. And as I go along, I just say update snapshot. So I'm going to try and demonstrate that here as well. So let's quickly put those faders up. I want to make it drastic so we can see it in a small view. Go back to my snapshots. So I'm going to make a second snapshot now. So say store. And this is band number 1. Enter. So if you pay attention to the bottom here, I know it's quite small. My resolution on my computer doesn't allow me to make it any lower. Use the little up arrow, say recall. You'll see the faders have flipped down. And I go to band. I can actually go to the top view. So I'm working here on the computer. You can see I'm not touching the console. That's my start scene. Faders are down. When I go to band number 1, it's there. That is basic snapshots. There is a huge amount of functionality when it comes to snapshots. The console is kind of set up in a way, and I've mentioned it briefly when we spoke about copy and paste. The basic copy and paste functions are really simple. I mean, it took me 5 seconds to explain it, right? But when it gets to the more involved stuff, libraries or only recording a certain part of what you saved or saving it for later or moving it to different folders or clearing a channel, those are considered more advanced features, and that's why we normally deal with it on the second day or once people have a basic understanding. Snapshots are exactly the same. You won't see it, but there's timecode functions. So if you don't know to look for it, you won't find it. Timecode functions. There is server snapshot on and off. There's your notes. There's fade times. Yes, MIDI triggers in and out. GPIO triggers in and out. Blackout. So there's quite a lot of stuff. Each of these sections can also be switched off separately by clicking at the top here. So they all have their ons and offs. If I do this, all the snapshots are now disabled. We'll touch on this again tomorrow. Hopefully, if we've got enough time, just be aware of it. The scope is also hidden. It's here. This is also a lecture on its own. But what we need to know for now is how to make a new snapshot, which is easy. We hit store. And if we make changes to this snapshot, so let's say we're going to bring all these faders up. They were all there, but some of them were off. We're going to say update. So now the metadata that's here, we're now going to paste into the snapshot, and we're going to say update. It's asking us yes or no. We say yes. I've now stored that data into that snapshot. Let's have a test. There you can see the little faders are down. We go to our start scene. All the faders should be down here. And now maybe as a basic function, what we want to do is just put in a fade time. I like to go with a fade time of 1.5 seconds. This is obviously dependent on where the fader position is. If the faders are quite close together, 1.5 seconds will always be more than enough. But just remember, it's the travel of the fader from position A to position B. So if it's going all the way from the bottom to the top, 1.5 is not that much. But I find as a general, that's not a bad place to start. You can check the faders are now doing not a snap. I'm going to recall it so you guys can have a nice top view here. Band 1, it's fading in nicely. I would suggest always using fades, especially when it's quite a big setup, because there's a lot of channels going on and off. And when you're mixing in-ears, it is crucial. Please, because I mean, those people have the in-ears in their ears, so the a massive on and off can actually give someone a bit of a fright, and it might put off the artist. So just bring the faders in gradually. Something about the phase that I want to mention, it applies to all the sends and the EQs and everything. So everything will go from its position to its next position. So if I'm, for instance, in this, you can see the EQs are slowly coming in. Just pay attention to the EQs. You see they are also fading. So if you've made changes between snapshots, at least that's also fading in. And then maybe just one other thing to mention while we're here, might also be considered as a basic feature. There's a little thing that says switches. So it's asking you when the ons and offs, at what stage should that happen? In the beginning, in the middle, or in the end of the fade? So if we're going to a mute scene, like the start scene, obviously that guy's going to have to be there. Otherwise it doesn't make any sense. If we've changed the ons and offs, if it switches it off and then fades it out, yeah, that doesn't make no sense. It's just going to, it's not going to happen. So when we go to a mute scene, for instance, we want to be able to change the switches to the end there. So let's quickly go to band. It's going to come in and top view. If we now go to our start scene, pay attention here. The faders now should go down and then the switches should go off because I changed that setting. Recall and off. Okay. That's the basics of snapshots. If you've got questions, please ask them and I'll try and explain it better. The rest of the features here, I mean, it's basically just reading. So it allows you to move a snapshot up and down, or you can duplicate a snapshot if you want to. It puts a little D there. You can rename it, create a new snapshot, select a specific range or a multi-select. Select either that one or multi-select, so like that. Select all, and then obviously you can delete all if you want, like that. So just reading, really. In this page is our isolates global on and off. So it's that recall save that we spoke about. So if you want to switch them all off, you can do it there. And then you can also edit the features, edit which of them are on and off. It's that the tool there. We talk about that tomorrow. And then there's a tool called a load ISO with show. Very cool. It allows you to merge two show files together. And I'm actually going to demo that tomorrow. You can also preview a snapshot without actually going to it, and I'll demo that with audio because it kind of doesn't make sense when I'm just talking about it. Okay, stacked snapshots. There's some talkback features here. Also, when we talk about this, so this pertains to that part there, we'll also talk about that tomorrow. A nice feature, which I'll consider also a beginner or introduction type feature, is there's a thing here called meter lock. You'll notice whenever I push a button on the console, it gives me this overview of that specific channel, right? So for instance, I can go hold in my kick channel. It brings up the overview, and that allows me now to manipulate the EQ. If I let it go, it'll be gone again. So it's like a quick view, if you want to call it that. Sometimes when you're mixing front of house, that can be a little bit irritating because you want to see your meters, right? Maybe you've got a big PA going and it's important for you to be checking that the meters are coming in reasonable because you've got a nice wild band on stage and you want to make sure you don't break anything. Then you can push this button, meter lock. Now if I push my select buttons or anything here, it doesn't spill it out. the meter always stays in place. So if I switch it off, Rian is frowning, so I'm going to do it again. So when I when I do select it there, we're seeing the overview of that channel. When I say meter lock, I can now push any select and mix as I please, but the meters always stay in place. Okay. And obviously, this also allows us to jump around on the console. That's for instance. Great. Quite a nifty little tool. Snapshots. Your USBs for transferring anything onto the console, taking off, are these two, yeah? Master section. So we've got a left and a right, which has got an on and off, and there's also a center for a center cluster. And some people run their subs on there. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. There's isolation. These buttons here, this one is called Solo Blend, Solo Trim, and Headphones. The one that's important for you guys at the moment is obviously the headphone outs, and it's right here. Headphone outs right here under my finger. Great, right there. The console's got two monitor buses, A and a B, so it allows you to do, for instance, stereo in-ears and stereo wedges. You'll see it's got two different fader positions. So it's lit when it's B, and that's A. There's on and off. It also shows you whether we PFL or AFLing. That's little two LEDs there. And then there's an extensive monitoring configuration. That's also one of my passions in life, because I'm a monitor engineer, so this is very important to me. I think the basics for now is... where's my monitoring section? Is there. So we've got monitor A, monitor B, and headphones. They are, all three of them are stereo. Why is this thing off? And the main thing to know at the moment is these guys here. So solo in is a input, any input. So any input on the console, we need to can switch it off. So now if I solo any input, we're not gonna hear it. Let's get some playback going. So at the moment we're listening to, let's listen to electric or a bass. So it's obviously an input. If I untick it, it's still soloed, but we're not hearing it, right? Yeah. So you can say, yeah, it's maybe only going to B, or it's maybe only going to headphones. Output solo refers to the output. Talkback return is a hard insert into our monitor bus. So this can be anything. It can be comms section or any. It can be a front of house engineer. It's something that we want to hear all the time, regardless of whether we have soloed something or not. There's a diagram of this in the manual, user manual, and I think it's page 93 and 94. If there's two pages you want to read in the manual, it's those two pages. The one page talks about, I'm maybe just double check my facts, what page it is. The one page talks about all the monitoring talkback features, and the page right after that talks about all the monitoring features. I actually wrote this down somewhere. I must just find it. Training. So if there's two pages, I know we don't enjoy reading manuals. We get stuck first and then we read it. But if there's two pages you want to read, it talks about this section here, and it also talks about the talkback section. I am going to explain this whole section in detail tomorrow. So if you're interested, stick around for that. What we need to know at the moment is the basic stuff. So if we're using it for near fields, monitor A, obviously we want left and right on, like that. If we using it for in-ears, we want to untick that and do that. We want to monitor our input and our outputs. back return is a hard insert, mono hard insert pre our AFL and PFL. So it's something we're going to always hear as long as the fader is up. Then we also have 2 stereo inserts. That can be anything. In this case, I've labeled them on air, so there'll be a playback from the Obi, for instance, and my Mac, which is just background music. You can decide, choose either or of these 2. So this is what's playing into that monitor bus when nothing is selected. So say you're mixing, well, what can be the scenario? I'm mixing in-ears, and there's an OB broadcasting. So now I'm in a scenario that when the OBs go to, when the OB vans go to, sorry, it's just my camera switching off. When the OBs go to, why is it doing that? To an ad break. I'm sitting with my in-ears in, and I can't hear what's going on because they're in ad. So in the venue, for instance, say it's Summers or whatever, the venue we quiet, or there's an MC on stage, but they're in an ad break. So what we can do is we can bring in whatever's on air. We can go to the OB van and say, can we get a left-right of what you guys are broadcasting? All your ads, your stings, and everything. So at least when we are not live in the venue, I can now click that button there. I've given it a patch point. Yeah, it's very simple. So it can be local, whatever, AES, like that. If it's a fancy OB, it's giving us AES. It's patched AES there. When that is ticked, and nothing on the console at that stage is solo, so we go solo clear, boom, we'll be hearing whatever is coming in on those inputs. As soon as I solo something, it'll go away. Okay, so it allows you to still mix but follow what's happening on air. And this can be anything. This can be talkback chatter or comm systems or anything. You can, you see I've got Mac in there, so I mean, you're busy setting up and you just want to listen to some music. You can plug it in there and you can still work, but then when you clear your solo, you're listening to that. I'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, but I just want to show you it's quite a versatile monitor setup. It's very quick and easy to change. For instance, we can say a B is following headphones, so now whatever's happening on monitor A is going on B and on headphones as well. So say if you've got 2 sets of monitors that you want to use, you can do it that way. Or if, what would be the other scenario? Say these sets of monitors are in your control room and this sets of headroom is in the control room next door. You can just say copy and they'll hear, for instance, the left and right, but they won't hear your solos. I hope that makes sense. There's a little dim level here. This refers to the talkback. So whenever you're hitting a talkback, it will dim your solo. Make it slightly softer. That's what dim means. Like dimming a light. So you can say -12 is normally a good place to go. So whenever I hit that button, it will bring that down. Great. So we'll continue on that in the session tomorrow morning with advanced features. I need to just go to my PowerPoint and make sure that I am doing everything that I'm supposed to talk about. Great, looks good. Okay. Snapshots we've done. Great. Where are we? We need to look at Vistonics. It's obviously something that's extremely important and we haven't spoken about. And we need to look at this main menu. How are we doing for time? Ah, great. We are doing fantastic for time. All right, let's first look at our Vistonics page. So we spoke about it a little bit this morning. It's this guy here. At the moment, we're looking at a input bank. Let's go to, say, for instance, Input bank B, there's our drum kit. As I said, exactly the same as an analog console. At the top, we've got our inputs. We've got two inputs. Input 1 and 2, remember, is the little function key. The function key here. Oh, I've put it on lock mode. Let's take it off lock mode. Let's put it on there. When I go function key, there it will flip to the second input by itself. It's not following in the console for some reason. Why do we need two inputs? So it's normally a main and a backup. So vocal microphones. So you always have a backup mic. But now the problem is if you're mixing monitors and you take that, you've got one mic that's the backup for say 10 vocalists. If you now give that mic to the lead vocal whose mic's not working, the routing is completely wrong, going to all the monitors and the effects units and into maybe her in-ears and her wedge. So you've solved one problem, but you created 20 others, Rian says. So how do we solve that? We take that backup microphone and we patch it on all the vocals on input 2. So say these were vocal channels. We'll go to input 2, this one here, and we'll patch that mic, say it's mic number 6, on all of them, all the way through. So now when we're working here, and we need to go to the backup, it's as simple as just pushing the little F button. All the routing stays the same. Worst case scenario, maybe just need to match the gain. Okay. That's the one thing that I use it for all the time. The other thing I use it for is when I've got a backup playback machine. So say I've got like in corporates, this happen often, we've got a VT machine and there's maybe 1 or 2 backups. But now it's eating a lot of space on my console. So we're ever only going to listen to the one or the other. We can't make both of them live. So why have separate channels for them? So if this was my VT playback, I'll have the inputs of the first one patched into, let's go, yeah. So let's say these are our VT channels, 25 and 26. Let's set it up as VT. So we need to give it a patch point. So it's local 1 and local 2. Great. Everyone agrees we've patched it. So we can see at the bottom there it's mic 1 and 2. Fantastic. And we want to give it a backup. So we go to in patch 2 and we give it a backup patch, which can be number 3. And number 4. At this stage, obviously, you'll realize we're working with 2 channels, which doesn't make a lot of sense. We want to link the 2 channels together. So we're going to go to pairing. It's also under inputs. We're going to say we want to pair from channel 25 to 26, pair. Once we've done that, you'll see it's already gone hard left, hard right, which is great. So if we go to our channels, they are now linked, ons and offs are linked. The gains are completely crazy, so we're going to fix that. It's playback, so it's probably going to be quite hot, so we probably need to only gain it up like a little bit. Great. You'll notice there's a trim that we can manipulate as well. And there's a pad because it's a preamp. There's the oscillator that we spoke about earlier if we want to put the tone on. Now, if we're going between, pay attention to here, mic 1 and 2. If I toggle this input 1 and 2, we are now jumping between input 1 and 2 and input 3 and 4. So it'll be playback 1 and playback 2. Now, the next thing we would want to do is maybe consider the format. Make sure left is left and right is right. So in this case, left goes left, right goes right, but we can also swap it around. If for some reason we're in the show and we lose the right channel, and the playback's only going out to one of the channel, This often happens with keyboards. I don't know why always. You always lose one channel of the keyboards. You can say I want the left input to go to both, like that, or the right input to go to both. Or you just want to sum the left and right together and make it mono. So these formats is quite handy. I often use this one when it comes to mixing in-ears for the drummer, because you want to, obviously the technician has patched it in the view of the stage, but we want to maybe swap it around so it makes sense for the drummer. Instead of now changing the patch points and messing up your recording, you can just turn around there. So that's quite a handy little thing there. Low cut is a low cut, 75. The cut's at 75, and I think it's 12 dB per octave. It's fixed. You also have a variable low cut, which you should be using on almost all your channels. And then very handy is a high cut. I never used to use this, but I have come to appreciate the value of high cuts. When you have a huge amount of microphones, especially condensers, and you're sending them to in-ears, it starts to get extremely roomy. Also with orchestras, you tend to have this problem because you've got a huge amount of condensers, and condensers are very sensitive to the high frequencies. So you start getting the sizzle. He says quiet pickups, exactly, Rian. So you start getting the sizzle in the PA. You can actually dial that back with a high cut. Sorry, off topic, but I've started using this extensively on my condensers. So I normally just listen in and then I'll dial it down till it's sensible. Obviously, when you patch a preamp, you can switch on the phantom. It's right there. And you can turn around the phase. I want to mention this. It's also slightly off topic, but someone asked me the other day, what is phasing? One of the classes we did. And this is maybe a good time to demonstrate it. So why would we need to turn the phase around? So this phase invert refers to 180 degrees. So it's a total flip upside down. So if you guys can remember from school, we've got a sine wave. It looks like this, right? The opposite of it will look like that. If we put the two together, we should get nothing, right? So what often happens is on something like a snare drum, you've got one mic at the bottom to get the top of the snare, and you've got one mic at the top and one mic at the bottom to get the two sounds of the snare, the attack of the snare and the snare sound. The problem is now you've got opposing microphones, which means whatever this mic is picking up that is similar to the other one is going to be cancelled out because of their physical position. You're actually now taking the mid-range of that drum away. So the fix is to flip the phase around 180 degrees on one of the microphones. And I'm just going to demonstrate this because I know someone's going to watch this video and they're going to wonder, what is Gabriel talking about? So this is what I want to demonstrate here. I'm going to use the signal generator to demonstrate it. So at the moment, there's tone, white noise. I'm going to make it a tone, hopefully without killing any hearing. Let's make it slightly higher. Great. So I put on the oscillator on that input. I'm going to do exactly the same on the input next to it. So that guy there, that guy there. And then if I multi-select, what you're going to find at the moment is when I bring the second fader up, we are getting a 3 dB amplification, which mathematically makes sense because we're adding the two signals together. Have a look what happens when I put the second channel out of phase. Something very freaky happens is we almost lose all the signal. If I get these two 100% the same, there we go. Nothing. If I start pulling this down, it's going louder, which looks like absolute witchcraft. But what's happening is these two sine waves are exactly the opposite of each other. Why is this important? Because if we're working with audio, we are always working with some kind of phasing. Any microphone that is picking up the same source as another microphone will be cutting out some of the source. In the case of a snare, it's quite dramatic because you've got this top mic and this bottom mic that are almost facing each other. So in that scenario, you have to be very careful to make sure if you're actually complementing the audio or you actually losing some of the audio. And it's normally not as drastic as it is there, but it can be as bad. I've found often with condensers that are quite close together, it can actually get really, really hectic. Okay, sorry. I hope that makes sense. It's just something I thought I'll mention. So the easy test to do is this. You are you've got an input on that channel and you just want to see if the two mics are in phase. You'll lift the two faders up and you'll flip this phase button in for a moment. If the audio goes louder, it means the two mics are in phase with each other. If it goes softer, it means it's out of phase with each other, and then you physically need to either go and move the microphones into different positions, or you need to maybe add some input delay. So those are your two options. Sorry, a little bit of a history lesson there. Okay, inputs, as you should know by now, we click the little plus button and we choose what we need. There's input 1, there's input number 2. The next thing, let's go back to our playback channels. We want to obviously label the channel and give it a name. Channel label, we're going to click it. It'll expand. And then there's a long label and a short label. The long label is this label here. The short label is that little name there. I normally label both. So I'm going to say backspace to clear it. I'm going to say, call it VT, number 1. And we can say left if we want to. Now we want to copy that over, because obviously we don't want to label the whole console twice. That's quite a lot of work. So we're going to click the short label and go backspace and backspace. That copies over the name from the long label to the short label. I'm going to just do it to the channel next door to it. I actually want to leave it off for now. It should be enough to do the closing. Right, channel right next to it. We're going to quickly go channel. It's obviously, this is also going to be VT because the two channels are linked. 1, and it's going to be right. Backspace, backspace. And then something that's nice to do at this stage is to give it a color. It's a feature that's available on the console, and I've started using it a few years ago, and I love it. I love the fact that you can see, I'll group my inputs all green, I'll make my effects all yellow, all my odd channels I make blue, like odd things, you know. When you're looking at the console, it just makes a lot of sense when you see the colors come up here. Like, for some reason I made it blue here, the drum kit. I hardly ever do that. I normally make it green. Also the ones I'm not using, I leave gray. So I know I haven't used them yet. Just kind of as you're patching through the console, you're giving them colors, and it kind of makes sense now when you look at the console what you've patched and what you've not patched. I love having all my effects yellow and my fixed returns yellow. The vocal effects are yellow. When you start working fast, then it saves you a huge amount of time. Okay, that's that. Last little thing here on the inputs is obviously input delay. Where you'll need to use that, I guess the most common place to use it is when you've got signal coming from a playback machine and it's someone talking, and that the video part is going through one or two switches or encoders or little AV boxes, and by the time it gets to the screen, the audio and the video is not together anymore. The lip sync is out. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to delay the audio to get it back into sync. Or if you're in a very big venue and you're quite far from the PA, you'll have to find a delay point in the middle of the venue to bring it in again. You'll see it's in milliseconds, which makes sense if whoever's doing AV knows the gear and can tell you how many milliseconds it is. Otherwise, you're going to just have to guess it. You can change this to meters. If it's a distance issue, say if it's a camera feed with low latency and is going on the LED screen, and we know in the middle of the venue is, let's call it 30 meters. We can go to settings, one of the few things that's under the settings menu. We move it to meters, right? And now we can go and dial in those meters. Let's say it's 30 meters. You'll see on the right hand side we've got the primary gain, and then on the left there's a finer one that allows us to go into in smaller increments. So say it was 30.3, we can now get it spot on like that. This is also actually a nice little calculator because we can now go and see 30 meters, how many milliseconds it is. Go back to settings, make it milliseconds. And now it's 88.24 milliseconds. Okay. For those of you who don't have an audio calculator on your... Rian's laughing at me, so I'm laughing with him. I'm not laughing at you guys. Okay, great. That's input delay. Next thing is EQ. Quite straightforward. It's 4-band parametric EQ. That works like that. You can flatten the EQ by holding in this little flat all button like that. You can switch off the EQ on and off, and you can also switch off one band at a time. The rotaries on the console, they all touch sensitive. So as soon as you touch them, there's a little eye that pops up on the screen. It's that little guy there. And you'll see wherever you are busy working on the EQ will then light up white like that. So it also gives you indication. So you can see as soon as I move it, it goes white. And when I'm on the console, it's actually the touch that activates it before I even start turning it. So that gives you an indication of what button I'm holding, which is fantastic because that means you can actually EQ without looking at the buttons at all. As soon as I touch the button, whatever band I'm working on will go white, and now I know. So you can do an EQ without looking at your hands, which is actually a really nice feature. I love it. Okay, let's quickly look at dynamics. So we've got a gate on each channel, obviously. The gate has got a key insert already selected for us, and that's got a low cut and a high cut. That's if you want the gate to be triggered within a certain frequency range. So, for instance, if this was tom 1, I would do something like that. If it was a lower tom, you maybe want to do something like that. So the spill of the hats or the snare is not opening your gates. It's a normal gate. There's not much to say about it. You can switch it on and off. There's a ducking feature if you want to use that. It's got a tack, a hold, a release, and it's very handy. It's got a range. So this is how, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah. there's the range is whether that gate is completely closed or actually slightly open, letting some audio through. I guess that's the easiest way that I can explain it. Sometimes if you use a gate on something like a tom, it can sound quite unnatural when it opens up, like it snaps open. Then a solution would be to dial this range up, which means the gate's not completely closed. It will now be kind of halfway open. Okay. To patch the key, a different source for the gate, trigger source, it's right there. So it can be any of those things. It can also be a direct out or a bus out if you want something else to trigger it. And you can also solo that specific input using that. If you solo this insert, you'll also be able to listen to whatever you are doing on your high cut and your low cut. So just keep that in mind. If you're bringing in say a kick, yeah, you're manipulating it here with a high cut and the low cut. So obviously that needs to be on. So just a good to know. Obviously sometimes on your vocal channels you don't need a gate, but you need a de-esser. So there's a lovely de-esser. It's already set up, ready to go. And the only thing you need to do is set the frequency. It's got a range as well. And this is how much you'll be de-essing. And I normally find that the 60 on someone who's really sibilant is a little bit too much, so I normally go slightly down. You can make it wider if you want, but the de-esser is one of those things. You're just going to listen. You're going to listen, you're going to dial it in. Simple as that. We've got a compressor and a limiter. They are inserted in the channel in this order. Oh, I really want to talk about the compressor for long, but now I'm running out of time. Okay. So are we still good on Facebook? Okay, it seems good on the stream, yeah. Okay, so I think it's on your kant. So we've got a compressor and a gate. You can use both simultaneously. It's like an oil compressor, not much to say there. It's got a threshold attack releaser ratio. And a very interesting thing on this compressor, something I just want to maybe squeeze in, is the auto makeup gain, which is slightly different to some other mixers in the sense that it's quite dynamic. So I'm going to use the kick to explain it. I think I already got it on, yeah. So what the auto makeup gain does is, here's our threshold. The audio is coming in. Obviously, when the audio hits the threshold, we're starting to apply compression at a certain ratio, right? That's how compressions work. So the audio comes in. Whatever audio is higher than the threshold gets compressed at a certain ratio. That's a compressor. So obviously the ratio is higher, we're adding more compressor, more of the compression. Then obviously makeup gain is normally in this case here. So say we've got heavy compression happening here on the kick 6, which is ridiculous. We should never do that. But let's say in this case we were doing that. We would maybe want to add that back in. And we'll use our makeup gain to do that. So let's quickly go to that kick. That makeup gain, I'm on the console now, we'll use to make it up, right? So we can add the 6 that we've taken off, we can make it, match it again, so the input and output of those channels are the same, right? Sounds like that. It's me making it louder and putting it back where it's supposed to be. Auto makeup gain does the same thing, but it does automatically, and it's dynamic. It's not a set thing. So when the audio comes in and we're taking those 3 or 4 dB off, it's automatically adding it on to the signal on the other side of the compressor, and it sounds like this. And this is actually something that you can use if you're working on a PA that's quite lazy on the low end, and you're trying to get the kick out and moving, and maybe the drum's quite old and it's not giving you a lot of movement. This is something you can actually now use as a tool. Get Pro Tools going again. So there's our kick, quite a violent T6 going there. If I put the auto makeup gain on, you'll hear I'm gaining a huge amount of dynamics. I actually had to pull the fader back now because I was going to clip. So that's without, and that's with. So let's quickly have a listen to what that sounds like in the mix. At the moment, the kick is kind of sitting there. The kick is kind of sitting there where we kind of expect it, which makes sense for jazz. But I'm just gonna humor me, and I'm gonna put the output gain, the auto makeup gain on that channel. That's off. That's off. That's on. So as you can hear, it gives us a huge amount of movement on that channel. So I actually use it on my in-ear mixes and on my snare and my kick to get nice movement, which means now I can have it a lot softer in the mix, but because it's so dynamic on pop music, the guys kind of hear it. And it kind of, when I'm mixing pop, it kind of makes sense because pop music's got that very aggressive kick and snare going the whole time. All right, we need to move along. Limiter, so you can use the compressor and the limiter at the same time. Obviously, just keep in mind that it's sharing the same gain reduction, so you might need to switch on the limiter first and set it. So say it's a bass guy that's slapping, you'll have to set the limiter first and then set the compression, and then you can switch both of them on. I have used it for that feature. I had a bassist that plays extremely soft, and then when he slaps, he gets the gees, and then everything is clipping. So I had a limiter on there as a safety, and the compression was doing kind of most of the compression, but the limiter was just catching those high notes. There's one other dynamic tool that I need to just mention, and I have to go to inserts quickly to talk about it. Go to inserts, the bottom here, say BSS, and that's a dynamic EQ. As soon as I select it, it'll pop up on the channel there. And this is basically a combination of a EQ and a compressor, and you've got 4 of them spread over the 4 bands. So instead of just having a compressor that compresses the whole signal, we've now split our frequency range, our lows, low mids, high mids, and highs into 4. And we've got a compressor within each of those. So this allows us, if we only want to compress the lows or only the mids, like, what can I use? So if we're listening to our kick and that nasty cardboard, we can try and take it out now using this guy. So we can say, I don't know, I'm guessing it's around, I don't know, 1K. Ooh, I need to switch it on. It's not actually really triggering. So you'll see now, I don't know if it's so small, maybe I should try a different frequency. Now, unfortunately, the gain reduction is something that's not following with on the offline editor. But that little block now is showing the gain reduction within each of those bands. So what I've done here is I dialed in the 250. You can expand or compress. I'm compressing, and I've got the threshold all the way down. So whenever those low mids are present in that 250 range, it's only compressing that and it's leaving the rest of the signal. So, how's it, man? Yeah, no worries. So this allows us, so we just received another guest in the room, yeah? So that's why I'm saying that. So that allows us to decide what we want to compress. So a classic example will be when we've got something like a vocal, and we want to just compress a certain range. Sometimes the vocals, when they sing in their higher register, there's a part of the vocal that's really screechy. But when they go to the verse part, it actually sounding quite nice. So what we can then do is ask them to go into their chorus part, hone in on that frequency, whatever it might be. So say it's 2.4K. So it's 2.4K. We can now go and select that 2.4K and only compress that. It's quite a nifty tool. It's one of those things you're going to have to play around with to understand it. So I'm going to speed along because I see we've got 20 minutes left for this overview. This is the global view of our bus sends. They're there. We can switch them on. So it's just another way of sending this specific channel to those buses. We've got some groups at the bottom there. Then when we go to the bottom here, is exactly the same as the analog console once again. We've got our pan left and right, which makes sense. And we've got the button to assign to our left and right channel and also to our center channel. And we can decide whether the mode is now left and right or LCR, if you've got an LCR setup. We've got a vMix assign here. vMix is a auto mix system that Soundcraft has, and we primarily use it to mix speech together. And I'm going to demo this tomorrow. Very exciting. Inserts. We can create external inserts on this console. We can do 64 of them. We can also insert a lexicon effects unit straight onto a channel. And then obviously what I just spoke about is our dynamic. EQ is the one dynamic that needs to be inserted onto a channel to get it working. And obviously it's something that is normally off, so we have to switch it on. This is something that's very nifty, and I just want to mention this very quickly. We often use inserts to send signal to our plugin server, right? So for instance, we'll be using this channel and we want to send it to a plugin server. So we're going to go create an insert. So setup. So it's going out MADI 64 and it's coming back MADI 64 like that. Now I've created it and we have to just select it. Now the audio is coming in the channel. When it hits it at the bottom here, obviously I need to switch it on. It's going out MADI stream, the local MADI at 64. It's going to the plugin server and it's returning again on 64 once it's been processed. What often happens, because this console is so forgiving when it comes to headroom, is that we've pulled so much gain that we're not clipping that plugin completely. And the plugin can't take it. Even if we trim it down on the plugin, it's still a problem. Because the thing about this console that I haven't mentioned this morning, because we were rushing like crazy, is that once we've got 40-bit floating points. So what that means is we'll never be able to clip the audio in the digital domain. It's impossible, and I'll prove it to you. There's a bass channel. You can see it's that guy there. I'm going to quickly trim this thing up. 18 dB. Well, you can see it's hitting the top there, but the little red light's not going on. And if we listen to this, the audio still sounds fantastic. We can now go to the compressor and add another 20 dBs there. And although that's a solid bar, the audio is still not clipping. That's the wonder of floating points. So the console's got huge amount of headroom. The only place you can clip this console is on the preamp, and even that's hard work. You can now even go to the direct out and go trim it up there again, or to the insert. There's still another 18 that you can trim it up on the insert. What does this mean? It means that the console will give you thumbs up, but everything else, all your plugins, everything will be clipping. So the workaround is this trim here. So what often needs to happen is you need to trim it down there significantly to make sure we're not clipping our plugins. And there's a generous 18 dB there. So if your gain is in a reasonable place and you've not done too crazy things with your trims, your audio is going to be healthy. Comes down to decent gain structure. Yeah, this console will let you trim things up. I don't understand. It's actually interesting. I have come across someone that complained that they couldn't get enough headroom, and it boggles my mind because you can now send that signal that I've gained up 65 dBs. You can send it to a group and still gain it up there again and again, and it won't clip. So if you're struggling to get headroom, wow. Yeah. So okay. So that's that. We're gonna now quickly move along. So I spoke about that. We'll talk about vMix tomorrow, and then obviously we've got a direct out. Same as the insert. We can choose the pick-off point. So in the insert, you can go pre or post, dynamic, and EQ and fader. When it comes to the direct out, you can also go straight after the preamp and skip the low cut. So in the case of a recording, you'll probably want to use that as a pick-off point. Obviously, you'll just give it a position. In this case, it's already been patched to Maddie and Dante out G27, so it's output 27. It's a parallel out, and you can just choose where you want it, and then you can choose your gain. Tomorrow, I'll talk about a feature called direct out gain sharing, which allows you, when you pull up your gains, to actually compensate on the output of your direct outs. It's like Soundcraft's way of gain tracking. Yeah, so we are running out of time for the guys on Facebook, so we're just going to quickly do an overview of the main menu, and then we're going to have a lovely lunch, all of us, hopefully. The reason why I leave the main menu for last is there's actually not a lot here because of what I've explained this morning. We've got our show files, GPIOs, the syncing. As soon as you bring in an external clocking, it will automatically switch over to external or word clock or Dante. You can force the Dante sync point to either be slave or master. If you do that, very important to read the section. Because using the slave mode, which is the default, if the console will act as the master for the Dante network. So that's like one of those things you want to read, because when it's on slave, it actually means the rest of the Dante network is slaving to the console, which makes the console the master, right? Another little note is make sure that you've matched it in Dante controller, which makes sense. Tie lines is 128 tie lines. So tie line is literally making a connection between a physical input and a physical output. So any inputs, say mic 1 and output 1. We can quickly build one. We've got 128 of them, so this is a nice place to do a recording, to pick off. So I can say mic 1 should always go to Maddie 1, Dante 1, like that. And we can set and forget. It will always be like that. So this is a clever way of sending signals from one console to another or to a recorder. Anywhere, yeah. Any record machine or phone record machine to another console or just maybe ingest it into a Dante network. You can convert Maddie to Dante here. So it can be a Maddie to Dante converter or Dante to Maddie converter if you please. Effects, we've got 4 of them. You patch the output of a bus into an effects unit and then return the input into a channel. Same as you do with the analog console. MIDI we'll talk about tomorrow. If the console loses power or anything, it'll come up under this log. So if there's any issues on the log, which brings me to this point here, main. Make sure you set the time to the correct time. Otherwise, the log means nothing. If you've got the wrong date and time, it doesn't help that you're logging any errors, because if it's saying the 5th of September and it's 1975, it's irrelevant whether you've lost power on your stage rack because you weren't, So I normally, when I start up the console, I make sure the firmware is in to date and the time is set correctly. It's under settings here. We're going to get there now. So that's just a log. You can expand it and you can clear it, and that's the gig. Under settings, very simple. There's not a lot here. That's why I don't normally spend a lot of time talking about this. You can just change the time and date there, very simply. The meter hold is just this little thing that floats there. So it's the peak that floats there for a second. There you can see on the kick. Right? You can make it longer, shorter, and you can also change the point. Enable next is these buttons here. They're normally off. So if you push it, the snapshots won't progress unless you've switched it on. Backup interval. As soon as you create a new show file, it will do an auto backup. That's why I say it's fun. If you haven't created a new show file or saved a new show file, then you are still in nowhere land. So let's quickly look at that while we're talking about it. So how do we get to a default position? I'm going to unplug my network cable, otherwise the console is now going to try and jump here. There's two options here. We can say front of house or monitors, and it also gives you, on this console only, gives you a 16 fader mode, which means the inputs have been spilled over both banks. Doesn't really matter which one you choose. I'm going to say load. It says, do you want to save changes to currently loaded show? I'm going to say no in this case. And now we can see the console's back to its default position. And then obviously, very important, the first thing we want to do is we want to save the new show file. So we're going to say save as. Can call it test 1. Great, there it is. And then the next step we need to do is obviously create a snapshot store. It's fundamentally important to always do this as your first two steps, because it makes it as soon as you've done this, then now we being able to do backup intervals. Up to this point, the console's not saving because it's got nowhere to save to. If you lose power, so if you just recall the show file and start mixing, if you lose the power, you lose your show. If you just done what I've done now, you're already in a good place. Even if you call your show file nothing and you don't make a snapshot, at least the console is backing it up. So I normally then call this start, like so. Now we can continue with our lives. The reason why this is important, if you're running a show where you're going to use the same show file for months and years on end, like a church, maybe at some stage you want to switch that off. Because otherwise your show file is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to eventually be this massive show file. It takes forever to load, and it's horrible to back up. If you get to the point you're mixing a show and you're not making changes anymore, just you can switch that off. I normally move it slower as well. As I said, on the inputs, you have to choose whether you're using Dante or MADI. We're almost wrapping up with the Facebook side of things. If you guys have questions, it's a good time to ask them now. I said on the input, the local ins and outs, we have to decide whether we're using the Dante or the MADI. I'm just going to go back to that picture. It's this guy here. So we've got these local inputs. At the top there's the MADI. At the bottom, there's the Dante. On the inputs, you have to choose whether you're going to use MADI or Dante. On the outputs, they're always parallel. So whatever you're patching to one will always be patched to Dante out one as well. this is where we manipulate it. So if we go to inputs at the moment, input patching, local, we'll see it's Dante. But if we change it here, under settings, and we say Maddie, we'll see now it's changed to Maddie. On the output side, doesn't really matter, because you'll see whenever we patch an output, it's already labeled Dante and Maddie, both of them. So they are obviously definitely parallel. Function key we spoke about, the delay units are here. You can also change the unit on your EQ between Q and bandwidth per octave. That is, I guess, just a random preference of some people. When we go to the last tab here, systems. So this talks to our network setup, also wireless mic data, and the real-time rack. I've not disconnected the network cable from the console, so it's now showing no input base because it doesn't have any at the moment. So normally what you want to see here is that everything is green. Go to the desk, and the only thing that's important is that the bays are connected and that they are green like that. There's also a button that says fader calibration. I don't know if you've ever noticed faders creeping weird like that because they're getting old, and when you link them together, they're not happy anymore. You can use fader calibration. It'll give you prompt you what to do. You'll put all the faders up, put them all down, and or first all down and then up, and it will set them the beginning and start points to the same place. If you ever have to change a fader, or someone gives you a fader, or you've got a fader problem and you swap it out, you have to fader calibrate. Especially if you bring a fader in from another console, or if it's a new fader. It's just good to know that functionality is right there. Local ins and outs is just showing you that everything is happy. So in the same case, we can see the DSP engine is green. We've got one mic card, it's green. We've got one line out card, it's happy. AES is happy, and now Dante and Maddie, which is coming up in the same slot, which is G and H, is happy. If you ever have multiple slots in and you're getting confused about what card is where, this is where you'll come. Those local ins and outs will show you what is Maddie and what is Dante, and in what slot it is. Especially with the bigger systems like the 5000 and the 7000, where you've got a huge amount of slots, it can get confusing in the sense that you've got so many cards going that you don't know what is in what slot. This will give you an overview of that. If you had a stage box connected at this stage, you'll see the same data there. Then obviously a very important one is our network. I'm going to quickly plug it back in. So at the moment, it's not connected anymore. And the feature that I've been using today is a feature called mirroring. So you can see it saw a network there. You will not be able to switch this network on, or this HiQ-Net port on, if it doesn't see a valid network. If you can't switch it on, it means it's not happy with the cable or the switch, or it's in a weird range, or it's clashing with something else on the network. So what I'm quickly going to do now and demonstrate now, which may be a nice thing, is I'm going to set up a network between this computer and this console. Yes. Sorry, were you referring to a question on Facebook? Yeah.
Roland is asking, Maddie and Dante outputs, if you patch aux 1 to Maddie 1, will it automatically patch to Dante 1 as well?
Yeah. Yes, it will. Yeah. The outputs are parallel. Yeah. On the inputs, it's either or, but on the outputs, if you're thinking in that way because you want to use it for recording, yes, you can use Maddie output 1 as your main recording and then use the Dante as your backup, which is exactly the idea behind that. Or you can get creative about your routing. Totally doable, and the answer is yes. So we just back here. We're setting up our network. So the first thing we want to do is just switch it on. I'm going to actually just switch that off for a second, the mirroring. We want to switch it on and see if it works. On the computer side now, when I switch it on, it's going to ask me, oh, it doesn't actually. Normally when you switch it on, it's asking me to which of the networks I want to connect, because obviously a computer has got more than one network connection. It's got a wireless connection and a LAN connection. When it switches on like this, without any issues, it means it's happy with the network. What I'm going to do now is use the mirroring mode, and I'm going to put the PC in slave, and I'm going to put the console, make sure the console is my master. So I'm doing exactly the same thing here. My network is on there. I'm going to mirroring and making sure it's on master and not slave, and it's on. And now theoretically we should have a connection. There we go. So now I'm moving the fader on the console, and it's moving the computer. And we can go the other way around. So this feature is called mirror mode. What it's designed for is connecting one or more two consoles. Sometimes you're in a scenario where your client will ask you for a main and a backup console, but to keep those two consoles in the same state is actually not that easy. So you can use this, you can introduce the same signals to both consoles from one stage rack. So you can send the one output to the one and the other output to the other one, and now the console's getting the same stage rack. You can have a PA monitoring hardware in the middle, take the outputs of those two consoles in there, and now you've got two completely redundant systems. That's one of the applications. But you can use this mirroring technology any way you want. You can use, put one console in front of ours, one for monitors. And for instance, what I'm doing, I don't have a second console, so I'm just using my computer. This is the offline editor. You can download this for free and put it on your computer, build your show file here, and then also use your computer as a backup. Or access to more faders. So it basically just links the two consoles together. A good thing to know is that it doesn't follow. So I can go to the B layer here and manipulate something, and it's not manipulating the console at that stage because I'm mixing on layer A. When I go to B, you'll obviously see that data is transferring. Great. So that's mirror mode. The other tabs here is data coming in from wireless microphones. I don't have that set up today, but ooh, sorry, wrong screen. The next tab here is wireless mics. See if we can get this going, but I don't actually have. Oh, wow, I did not expect that to work. So I do have one microphone, which is the one I'm talking on, connected to this network, which is the receiver, which is a Shure QLX-D4, and the PC, and obviously the VR1 is in the same network. So that metadata is just popping up because it's in the same network. But obviously for us to see it, we need to assign it to a specific channel, and there's an easy way of doing it. So in this case we can assign it to this channel here. Let's call it Gabs, like that. Give it a color, and we're going to have to, it needs to have an input. So in this stage it's mic 7, which is not really the channel I'm talking on, but let's just for now imagine that it is. So we're going to assign the metadata coming from that mic to input 7. So we're going to select it there. Normally if there's more than one, you'll have to scroll up and down. Select the audio patch, which is number 7. And if we go back to my channel now, which is my Gabs channel, you'll see we can see the RF and the yellow line. Yep, 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 is my audio level. If we click on it, you'll see now we can see the battery status of that specific receiver. We can also see at the moment it's running at a 794.175k hertz. Sorry. It's currently using antenna B. And there's an interesting thing that's happened here is when the gain selection, we can now flip between the gain selection of the console, which will be that patch point number 7 in the trim, and the receiver. So actually, if I, hopefully not going to mess this up now, but when I trim this down, my voice should go softer. And when I trim it up, so now I'm actually changing the gain structure of the microphone receiver, which is really handy if you're in a scenario where you are the front of house engineer and the RF tech and everything. This will allow you to gain that receiver off if you've got a vocalist that's going really loud and it's clipping the receiver and you're stuck behind the front of house console. You can also mute RF mute the output of the receiver there as well. So that's quite a handy feature. It does use a lot of bandwidth, and that is unfortunately not something on the Sennheiser side, but Shure is working on it at the moment. And that's basically everything when it comes to network. So tomorrow we're obviously going to connect an iPad to this network as well, but it works in exactly the same manner as what the the PC is doing at the moment. It's just we're going to be using the iPad app instead of the offline editor. So that's everything. Neldo, is there any more questions?
No, there aren't any more questions.
Great. Then I think we can. We're going to sign off. Is there any questions in the room for now? Great. Okay, guys. Thank you for watching. Please dial in tomorrow if you guys are available. We're going to leave these videos on for a while, so if you've got friends who are interested in watching it and they want to come and check it out at a later stage, it will still be available. Same with tomorrow's video. Obviously, we're continuing tomorrow with some of the topics that we touched on today, but we're delving in a little bit deeper, looking into some of the hidden features that's not so obvious. And then also looking at some of the advanced features. So if you're available, it would be nice if you guys can join us. Bye. And bye from everyone in the room.
Bye.
We'll have to just show that I'm not alone. There's Kenzo, there's Rian. You have to say goodbye. Bye. And Naldo. Naldo's hiding behind the monitor. Cool, guys. All the best. Keep well. Bye. Ja, ik weet niet.
That's weird.
Oh, I'd like to apologize again for the late coming.
No worries, man.
As long as you're here on time tomorrow,